Chapter 91, A Precious Gift. Joffrey was completely puzzled. The ritual was clearly very ordinary, but suddenly, Leaf's entry into the weirwood tree was as simple and natural as a skin changer entering an animal, like a calm breath. His mental power also sneaked into the weirwood tree with Leaf, experiencing the plant's wonderful perception of the world. One has to admire that the weirwood tree is indeed the best recorder of history, never adding its own opinions to the facts, much more competent than human historians and scholars. But how exactly did she do it, freely roaming among countless weirwood trees out of thin air? Retrospective magic can indeed change the time node of viewing history, but during the entire process of Leaf leaving the old weirwood tree and merging into the new weirwood tree, Joffrey did not feel any traces of magic. Is it that my eyes cannot see this power? Or is the world inherently like this, a formless and insensible rule? Hopefully, it's the former. Joffrey knew that his eyes were still constantly growing. During this period, the light emitted by magic energy became clearer and brighter in his eyes, and he could already see the faint patterns in the dense magic energy, distinguishing magic energy particles as fine as dust. Perhaps one day he would be able to break through the limit, allowing himself to see more of the mysteries of the world, and even interfere with the runes themselves. That would be true divine power. It is also possible that the old gods used a very high level of power to create this law. Gifted people who eat weirwood seeds can become one with all weirwood trees. Did the old gods really possess this kind of power? If it's true, how were they buried in the past? Or are they just resting? Are the old gods still alive? Joffrey didn't know, but the weirwood tree clearly couldn't give people enough security. He made a decision. The weirwood trees in the south must continue to be restricted, and the green seer's abilities should only be used to bestow the children of the forest. Let the eyes of the weirwood trees always watch the north, watching the footsteps of the others. After all, winter is coming. To the hand of the king, warden of the north, governor of the north, Duke Eddard Stark. May his journey be safe and his mission successful. Littlefinger Tyrion raised his glass high. Beautiful music was playing in the ballroom, and pairs of dancers in the pool held each other's hands tightly, looking up at the classical murals on the dome, spinning in gorgeous circles. Winter is coming. The guests raised their glasses together, unanimously using the Stark family's motto as a toast. The guests' laughter at this moment was mostly genuine. Prime Minister Eddard had not been in office for long, but it was already enough to show his incompatibility. This dire wolf, though not as fierce as the wolves that had once gone south, was equally cold-faced, looking down on all rules that did not suit his wishes. Fortunately, like all the dire wolves that had gone south before, this one was also about to return to that frozen land. Winter is coming, what a perfect farewell. Eddard stood in the secluded corridor, politely greeting the crowd. The guests contentedly shifted their gaze back to the dance floor. Prime Minister Eddard had not changed at all, he was only suitable for the north. Eddard was unaware of what the guests were thinking. Winter is coming, he thought, that was true. Eddard had to believe it. Having seen the children of the forest, having seen the supernatural power, and with the news from the north and the king's dispatch, the threat beyond the wall was by no means false. If the others had not really appeared, how could the king have allowed all the northern troops to go north? On this point, Eddard was very satisfied with the king's decision. At least the king still remembered the needs of the north, even if it was just returning the people of the north to itself. The mad King Aerys never remembered this, thinking that everything should belong to him. If Rhaegar had been on the Iron Throne back then, I'm afraid there wouldn't have been so many rebellious lords, and the ending might have been different. In a trance, Lyanna's voice rang in Eddard's ears again, "Ned, promise me." Eddard couldn't help but worry about Jon. His sister and Rhaegar's child. If Robert knew, he would probably go crazy, and even if Joffrey knew Jon's true identity, he would not be able to accept him. Eddard really wanted to bring him back to the north, but what reason could he use? Jon was already an officer in the city watch of King's Landing and should fight for the king. Eddard had thought about persuading him to quit, but every time he met Jon, that face, vaguely resembling Lyanna, was filled with a desire to make a name for himself, making him unable to speak. Besides, winter is coming. Which is safer, the north or the Red Keep? Which is more terrifying, the others or swords? Eddard couldn't be sure. Eddard also thought of his Bran, Arya, and Sansa. Sansa was already engaged to the king, she was destined to stay in the Red Keep and might never return to the north. Bran and Arya didn't have to stay originally. But after Eddard asked for their opinions, he received an unexpected response. Bran wanted to be a knight of the Seven Kingdoms, to wear white armor and a white robe, he refused to leave. Arya was reluctant to leave Jon and Bran, and unwilling to return to the north to wait to be married, so she insisted on staying in the Red Keep, saying she wanted to be a female warrior like Nymeria. Eddard did not insist, he could not shatter his children's dreams. He was just a little worried. How could he not be worried? Putting the children in a place like the Red Keep, without their parents by their side, only Cersei. Eddard looked towards Empress Dowager Cersei, who was sitting on the high platform of the ballroom. At this moment, she looked so perfect, simply the mother of the Seven Kingdoms, kind and graceful, completely different from the unreasonable madwoman in Robert's mouth. Eddard certainly knew which side was the real her. Even more unfortunately, she was actually the regent. Compared to Cersei, even the willful king was more like a competent ruler. Lord Eddard, the king's voice came from behind. Your Majesty, Eddard turned and saluted. The king walked closer kindly. You are the protagonist tonight, why are you just standing here? Many guests are worried that you are not enjoying yourself enough. There was not a trace of a smile on Eddard's face. The banquet is very good, I'm just thinking about the north. The king sighed, it's also my fault, paying too much attention to the war in the south, failing to give the north more support. I hope this sad war ends sooner. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, although the north has no surplus strength, Lord Tywin, the Tully family, and the Arryn family will not stand idly by. Renly's rebellion will certainly not succeed. Eddard was not sure. The king placed a hand on his shoulder. Please trouble Lord Eddard more, you are good friends with Tully and Arryn. Eddard seemed to understand the king's purpose. Your Majesty, I will definitely do my best. I believe. Halfway through his words, Eddard froze. He felt something. The king slowly withdrew his right hand from his shoulder. Feels good, doesn't it? This is the highest level of divine grace, a farewell gift I give you. A strange blue light curtain popped up in Eddard's vision, unwavering no matter how much he blinked and shook his head. So this was divine grace. The formless power within his body was constantly emerging, and he quickly realized that they would maintain the existence of the blue light curtain until the endless end. Was that all? The king's smile was very gentle. Lord Eddard, take care of your health, the gods need you, the world needs you. Remember, light is eternal. Eddard vaguely felt a sinking in his heart, a layer of tangible and intangible shackles. Robert, Sansa, Bran, Arya, Jon, honor, responsibility, faith, oaths, and the coldest divine grace. Chapter 92, The Great Cleaning. The sunlight was bright, and two small birds on the windowsill were fighting for the grains of rice on the stone slab, chirping crisply from time to time. Inside the room, the bed was covered with soft velvet. Joffrey comfortably rested his head on the maiden's lap, savoring half a blueberry plucked from her fair fingertips. A peaceful and beautiful morning. Your Majesty, everyone has arrived and is waiting outside, Hannah reminded softly. A busy morning. It was time. He swallowed the half blueberry, turned over, and sat up from the bed. Tell them to come in. He put on his outer robe, and the sound of footsteps approached. What a wonderful son, Your Majesty. Tyrion, the shortest, insisted on walking in front. You must be very pleased. The clever Tyrion wore the least Lannister-like outfit of all his clothes today, with brown, black, and smoky grey, but no gold or red. The Kingslayer beside him was much more proud. His white armor was still dazzling, and the gilded longsword glittered. Yes, the sun is good, Joffrey said with a faint smile. Tyrion looked around and walked to the long table and the prepared seats. Your Majesty is so considerate, actually making such a fitting seat for a little guy like me. I'm truly touched. Joffrey sat down on the high chair at the end of the long table. Everyone, sit. In the future, all small council meetings will be held here. A true king can, of course, convene a small council meeting anytime, anywhere. I see. Thank you, Your Majesty, for the seat. Tyrion sat in his place, to the king's right. The other ministers looked at the long table. It was similar in shape to the original council table, but each seat at the table had a unique symbol. The first chair on the king's left was engraved with a radiating eye. Arryn naturally understood. The second chair on the right was pure white. It belonged to the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, the bold Barristan. The second chair on the left was covered with swords, undoubtedly belonging to the Lord Commander of the Kingslayer. The third on the right belonged to the Commander of the City Watch, the Hound Sandor Clegane. Grand Maester Pycelle tottered to the third position on the left, slowly sat down, and leaned against the book-shaped backrest with padding. There was also a chair next to the king. Lord Steward Hannah had already sat down at some point. Everyone turned their attention to the king in the only main seat. Without a doubt, today's meeting had only one protagonist, His Majesty the King. Joffrey said in a calm tone, "Gentlemen, following Lord Tywin, Lord Eddard also left King's Landing yesterday to fulfill his more difficult duties in the north." Eddard had left, and most of King's Landing knew it. Some people secretly celebrated, some felt that the country had completely lost hope, and some believed that King's Landing was about to usher in tremendous changes. Undoubtedly, we present here must take responsibility for maintaining the smooth operation of the country. With Tywin the Regent and Eddard the Hand both away from King's Landing, and even Queen Regent Cersei not attending this meeting, it was clear that the we in the young king's mouth referred to himself. Renly's rebellion has stirred up dust, and we must sweep it clean. Joffrey gently brushed the dust off the table. "Gentlemen, don't you think King's Landing is a bit too dirty and messy?" Tyrion's eyes flickered, as if in thought. Dirty and messy. Grand Maester Pycelle seemed not to understand the king's implication. "Your Majesty, there are too many people in King's Landing. The Citadel has long conducted research on this aspect. With the existing conditions, there is no better way to deal with the garbage and stench in the city. Also," Arryn interrupted, "Grand Maester is too forgetful. His Majesty is a holy king blessed by the gods. How can he be compared to ordinary people from the Citadel?" Tyrion smiled, "May the gods bless King's Landing to lose its stench, and the air be as fresh as the king's wood." Joffrey glanced at Tyrion, "This is precisely where I need your help." Tyrion felt ominous. Hannah brought a roll of drawings and spread it out on the long table. "This is a construction sketch of the sewer system, drawn according to His Majesty's personal instructions. After its successful completion, I believe your prayer, Lord Tyrion, will come true." Tyrion pleaded with a bitter face, "Find someone else. I can count copper coins and read books by candlelight, but sewers are not my specialty." Joffrey looked at Jaime, whose armor was shining brightly, his gaze seeming to hesitate whether to change people. Thinking of the foul-smelling sewage, Jaime immediately betrayed Tyrion, "Good brother, don't say that. Wasn't the cleanliness of Casterly Rock your accomplishment? Don't decline, this task belongs to you." Tyrion glared at Jaime in disbelief, and finally had to agree. "I hope the people of King's Landing can have a little gratitude and stop giving me strange nicknames," Tyrion mocked. Joffrey asked again, "Is this enough to be clean?" Grand Maester no longer responded. Arryn said with emotion, "It may be clean on the surface, but although I have only been Master of Whisperers for half a month, I have seen the filth in people's hearts, which far exceeds 100 or 10,000 sewers." Hannah deeply agreed, "We should clean up these guys properly." The Hound also agreed, "Renly can't even reach the walls of King's Landing, but the rats in the city may sneak into the Red Keep." The king did not speak, but quietly looked at the others. Tyrion raised his hands, "I agree. The sewer is only the most superficial dirt. If we're going to do it, let's do it thoroughly." Sir Barristan saluted the king, "As long as your Majesty needs it, the king's guard fears no hardship." The smile on Jaime's face was still bright, "I am also a king's guard." The king and the ministers all turned their attention to the only Grand Maester who had not yet spoken. Pycelle's beard immediately began to shake. "Your Majesty, if you need the advice of a maester, please feel free to speak." Pycelle spoke clearly and fluently, with full emotion. "Good." Joffrey seemed to suddenly make a decision, "Since everyone is so determined, I naturally won't disagree." Tyrion silently watched the king issue orders. "Arryn, Hannah, Pycelle, you are responsible for registering everyone in the city and the Red Keep, and categorizing them. Tyrion, you are responsible for sorting out all the properties in the city. The Department of the Army and the City Watch will assist in the operation, and must maintain stability in the city and prevent riots. 5 days later, at dawn, seal the city gates and carry out simultaneous operations throughout the city. All vagrant, suspicious, and dangerous personnel will be detained for construction projects and supplied to the research department. All vague, unclaimed, and critical properties will be confiscated and supplied to the army. Remember, the gods are watching us," the king said with a pious expression. "Yes, your Majesty," the ministers all said respectfully. Tyrion could not see the true thoughts of his colleagues, but the questions in his own mind were difficult to dispel. How to do it? All, everything, all, these words cannot be turned into reality just by saying them. Chapter 93, Father in Heaven Above. Outside the Great September of Baelor. The High Septan was slowly helped down the steps by 2 servants who devoutly served the gods. Under the bright sunlight, the 7-faceted crystal crown on the High Septan's head scattered colorful light, sacred and dazzling, demonstrating the grace of the 7 gods. Nearby young monks and nuns looked over curiously. There were 77 steps outside the September, and the obese High Septan didn't like them. Usually, preaching and other activities were only conducted on the high platform, so why would he easily walk around? At this moment, 7 more servants carried a beautiful small palanquin and stopped it directly in front of the High Septan, the door open, waiting for the High Septan to walk down the steps. Everyone knew that outside the Great September of Baelor, the High Septan's feet rarely touched the ground. The High Septan carefully held the magnificent crown on his head, laboriously leaned down, and sat into the specially made small palanquin. "Let's go," he said, panting heavily and waving his hand tiredly. The servant attending to him immediately lowered the curtain of the palanquin door, and the light inside the palanquin suddenly became quiet and soft. Then, the palanquin rose and began to sway slightly rhythmically, as if giving a gentle massage. The High Septan closed his eyes, breathing in the faint incense, letting his thoughts roam freely. He was too tired. The new king was too willful. The coronation ceremony on July 7 was such a good opportunity. The king could gain prestige from it, and the church could gather more devout faith for the 7 gods. But the giant who appeared in the end ruined everything. From that moment on, people's faith in the 7 gods was no longer out of gratitude or beautiful wishes. Awe and fear dominated the ignorant lambs, making them kneel and kowtow, letting them be manipulated. The long night? The doom? The will of the gods? The High Septan didn't believe it. If that were the case, why bestow divine grace on the king instead of his most faithful messenger in the world? In order to show sincere service, the monks of the church had given up their family names, and he had even given up his name, willingly being a tool to convey God's will to the world. Could it be that all of this was just wishful thinking? The High Septan instinctively felt a threat. The king occupied the most glorious and lofty position, and his giant firmly lived in the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people in King's Landing, almost replacing the image of the High Septan. This was too terrible. The world must understand that the church is the messenger of the 7 gods. Otherwise, no matter how much preaching is done, it will only increase the king's power in vain. Clunk! The palanquin landed gently, and the destination had arrived. The High Septan adjusted the crown on his head again, a standard kind smile appearing on his round face, and then he opened the curtain. The black-haired gold robe pointed forward. "Hurry up, Your Excellency High Septan, His Majesty is waiting for you." The High Septan narrowed his eyes and looked over. The wide and magnificent gate of the throne room was tightly closed, seeming much smaller than usual. Did they actually stop me so far away? Did they want me to walk myself? High Septan! The black-haired officer urged again. After all, it was the Red Keep. The High Septan could only leave his beloved small palanquin and walk forward alone. But he still overestimated himself. It took him a full quarter of an hour to finally drag his body into the throne room for the journey of a few hundred steps. Now he only felt as if he had just eaten 100 holy meals for the 7 gods in a row, performed 1,000 rituals, and chanted 10,000 hymns, so tired that it was despairing. Fortunately, he saw an empty chair placed in front of the Iron Throne. Gods be praised! The High Septan rushed over in a frenzy, his heart filled with deep gratitude at this moment. It seems the sun is good today. High Septan is sweating a lot, Joffrey said lightly from the throne. The High Septan raised his head. The Iron Throne in front of him had indeed changed its appearance. The original countless towering spikes and blades had disappeared, turning into streams of lines printed on the high platform of the throne, supporting the king at the highest point. The Iron Throne seemed to have lost its majesty, or it seemed to have simply transferred its majesty to the king himself. The High Septan straightened his body. "Please forgive me, Your Majesty. The High Septan's duty prevents me from being idle. I am busy with prayer and neglect exercise, so I usually use a palanquin." "I see. The High Septan is indeed the spokesperson of the 7 gods, truly devout." The king's tone was normal, but the High Septan felt quite awkward listening to it. "I wonder why His Majesty summoned me today." A servant brought iced red tea, and the High Septan drank it all in one gulp. Joffrey's gaze lingered on the colorful crown on the High Septan's head. "It's nothing important, just discussing some doctrines. With a cup of iced tea down his throat, the High Septan immediately felt refreshed, and his mood improved a lot. What does your Majesty not understand? Just ask. Joffrey smiled. I don't understand? You're really getting carried away. High Septan, you may not know, but the symbols of the 7 gods have been wrong all these years, the king said, seemingly not joking. The smile on the High Septan's face disappeared instantly. The king said, Father, Mother, Maiden, Crone, Smith, Warrior, Stranger, the 7 manifest in these 7 aspects, guiding people through their lives. But we all know that the 7 are one. The High Septan could not object, these were all correct platitudes. Then why does the church use a 7-pointed star as its symbol? The king asked surprisingly. Ah! The High Septan didn't react at all. High Septan, which aspect do you think the 7 gods prefer? Father? Mother? The king asked seriously. The High Septan replied piously, any aspect, God loves the world and all living beings. The king shook his head, you guessed wrong. The 7 gods love all living beings, but he loves being the Father even more, presiding over judgment and justice for the world. So, the king raised a shiny brass 6-pointed star symbol, the Father should stand in the center to be worshipped by the world, and the other 6 aspects should be on the outside. The 7 gods should be a 6-pointed star. The High Septan was dumbfounded. A 6-pointed star? You're crazy. But the king walked down the throne with a body full of fire, stepping out fiery red footprints on the steel. You don't believe it. You really don't believe it at all. The air was so hot that even breathing hurt, and the High Septan couldn't help but lower his head, unable to utter the words of opposition in his mouth. The king stretched out his right hand and grasped the 7-faceted crown on the High Septan's head. The 7 gods have bestowed divine grace and divine will upon me, so of course I know what he loves most. To tell you the truth, he likes the 6-pointed star. The heavy crown was taken off, and the High Septan not only felt a sudden lightness on his head, but also a large piece was immediately missing in his heart. He remembered the crown and scepter that the king had snatched by hand during his coronation, and he remembered the light and heat that the giant had sprinkled down. Damn it, he had actually to resist such divine power before. Snap! The High Septan shrank suddenly, but fortunately the king only pressed his hot palm on the top of his head. High Septan, the 7 gods have brought divine grace and divine will, kneel down. The king's voice was calm and distant, as if coming from an unknowable distance. After all, it was divine grace. The High Septan knelt down piously. The entire church will be reorganized into the Gospel Department, under the command of the Divine Envoy, to spread the Gospel to the world. Every Sunday will be worship day, and all believers must pray. The High Septan trembled all over, and an inexplicable divine power entered his consciousness, and he was unable to resist. The contract is the proof. When he raised his head again, the High Septan's eyes had never been so fanatical and sincere, as if he were looking at the Supreme Father in heaven. Your Majesty, it is the 6-pointed star. The king just smiled. 4 days later, July 26th is the first Sunday, and the church must perform well. Chapter 94, Sam and the Research Department. The day after tomorrow is Sunday, Sam. Please put in a little more effort. Qyburn encouraged softly. Samwell Tarly looked up from the ground covered in ancient books and faintly glowing glass. The old man in front of him had an earnest look in his eyes, like a grandfather expecting his junior to grow. Sam forced a smile. I understand. Qyburn left with satisfaction. Only when the old man's back had completely disappeared did Sam finally breathe a sigh of relief. He touched his neck, it was so slippery and wet that he was already sweating. Fortunately, he probably hadn't been discovered. Sam lowered his head. The light from the glass on his lap had completely disappeared, and the surface was reflecting his own image. Staring at the eyes on the screen that belonged to him, Sam stared blankly. He was a little tired. From the heir of the Tarly family to the apprentice of a maester, and now to this, Sam's expectations had almost never become a reality. He knew that his father didn't like his fat, cowardly self, and his younger brother Dickon would be the heir sooner or later, so he wasn't too resistant to the new life in King's Landing. At least he could continue to read and study to become a knowledgeable maester without worrying about his livelihood. The beginning was stable, even beautiful. The Red Keep had countless books, some of which were extremely rare and could not be seen outside. With the permission of Grand Maester Pycelle, he spent days and nights buried in the books, like a greedy little mouse, desperately gnawing at the tempting knowledge in each book. Every biography wrote about a person's life, every history depicted scenes of events that had happened, and every ballad sang of people's innermost praise or complaints. There was also countless delicious food, harps and music, and maesters who were equally dedicated to knowledge. It was almost perfect, except for the lack of friends. Sam thought that such days would last for a long, long time. As everyone discussed, the Crown Prince was probably just having a whim when he asked for him. In the end, wasn't he just an inconspicuous apprentice under Pycelle? But the changes in the Red Keep were so violent and abrupt. In just one morning, 2 important members of the small council were reduced to prisoners suspected of treason. The gold cloaks were stationed in teams, looking particularly fierce, as if trying to kill everyone with their eyes. Did this have anything to do with everyone in the Red Keep? Sam wanted to say it didn't, but everyone obviously didn't think so. The Grand Maester became busy and idle. To the outside world, the Grand Maester was unwell, and his daily work had been reduced to almost non-existent. Internally, Sam personally saw the Grand Maester writing letter after letter at his desk. Some were burned directly, some were sent out by people, and some were personally tied to ravens, and he would only feel relieved after watching the ravens take off. There was also the popular steward Hannah, who was busy calling the servants of the Red Keep to reprimand them all day long. Sam didn't know the inside story. He only saw people leaving worriedly and coming out with serious faces, or never being seen again. Those things made Sam realize that a living person could disappear so quietly. Sam could only silently miss the previous life he had gradually adapted to, adapting to the new cook, new faces, new rules, and new atmosphere. But these new balances were quickly broken. The news of King Robert's death spread back to the city. That day, the city's bells were roaring madly, making people's ears hurt. When he went to bed, he still occasionally suspected that the bells were still ringing. That night, Sam couldn't see clearly, but something must have changed in the Red Keep again. It was an indescribable feeling, but it made people uneasy even when reading. After the night of the bells, people gradually advised him to have more contact with the outside world, and the Grand Maester also began to take him out more frequently. Sam vaguely guessed that it was because of the Crown Prince he hadn't met yet. This feeling seemed good. Sam began to look forward to the appearance of the new king. Until the Master of Laws, Renly, disappeared, the Knight of Flowers, Loras, and the Redwine twins became inexplicably low-key, people turned the Red Keep into an uncomfortable place again. Sam still couldn't see the truth, but he sensed the unrest in the future. He just didn't expect the change to come so quickly. He was suddenly appointed as a full-time historian, responsible for recording the proceedings of the small council meetings. Sam was a little excited at first, but after only one small council meeting, his heart was filled with deep confusion and panic. Every word of the king was shocking, as if he couldn't wait to completely overturn the 7 kingdoms. Duke Tywin sat proudly opposite the king. A single look could affect half of the small council, and every word he uttered was neither humble nor arrogant, and well-founded. Lord Eddard almost opposed all the proposals. Honor and tradition were the most frequent words in his mouth. Queen Regent Cersei sometimes helped Duke Tywin, sometimes agreed with the king, sometimes satirized Lord Eddard, and sometimes cursed someone who was not present or was present arbitrarily. And his master, Grand Maester Pycelle, was inconspicuous among the participating ministers, and almost only echoed Tywin's statements. "This is the small council meeting I'm going to record?" Sam quietly shrank in the corner, daring to move the pen in his hand only quietly and carefully, for fear that too much movement would attract the attention of any minister. Sam was quite keenly aware that the ministers would not like the records under his historian's pen. The more real and detailed, the more they would hate it. But a little cover-up? The king would obviously not agree. Sam endured the days uneasily like this until a few days ago. For some reason, after Duke Tywin left King's Landing, the king sent him to the research department, saying it was a temporary transfer. Sam had been trapped in this room ever since, unable to escape. His tasks were quite complicated. At first, it was to sort out ancient books and scrolls and find specific words and phrases. Later, it was to screen and input the content in a fixed format into the database, which was the scattered glowing glass on the ground. And then there was the testing of the performance and effectiveness of various Divine Grace modules, scoring the user experience, trying to give suggestions, and making improvements. When doing this kind of task, you only need to take different Divine Grace modules to easily get dozens or hundreds of slightly different Divine Grace light screens, and there are many changes that can be made to the light screens. And what he had to do was choose the best one. So this is the secret of divine grace. So mortals can also touch such a great miracle. At that time, Sam couldn't help but secretly excited. Unfortunately, the work of the research department is not just these. The kind smiling old man was actually responsible for the most critical and darkest work of the research department. All experiments that required consuming materials were under the control of the old man. Sam never thought that the suggestions like the sound is a bit harsh, the vibration is too weak, and the pattern is a bit awkward after looking at it for a long time would eventually consume 5 lives and create 2 lunatics with mental disorders. No wonder the old man was expelled from the citadel and his chain symbolizing the status of a maester was taken back. Sam sighed and clicked on the workbench on his lap. The glass screen lit up, displaying the tasks he had not completed today. The tasks on the workbench were counting down. Before the end of tomorrow, he had to divide half of King's Landing into 400 small blocks with roughly equal populations for easy blockade and control, and also mark all the passages. Drawing lines is fine, although it's tiring, at least no one will die, right? Sam comforted himself. Chapter 95, A Recruit's Daily Life. The night gradually brightened. A dim blue light softly illuminated the land and the tents. The clear sky was without a single cloud, and hanging there was not the sun, but a round, bright moon. The breeze was silent, the bonfire burned quietly. No one moved or spoke, and the distance was also asleep. What a quiet, good time. Tens of thousands of recruits were still soundly asleep, recovering the strength and spirit they had expended yesterday. But a figure walked to the center of the camp, raised a long, slender shadow in the dim light, and blew a mournful call. One sound after another, like a shrill scream, like an urgent call. Wake up, fight! That's what the horn said. Pairs of eyes snapped open, pairs of hands immediately and skillfully picked up clothes, trousers and belts from the dim bedding, pairs of legs neatly slipped into trousers and boots, and then they rushed towards the tent entrance, charging out without looking back. Clang! Clang! An even more piercing gong sounded at the entrance of each tent. The soldier waking people up used a long gong mallet to lift the thick curtain of the tent door. Lazybones! Hurry up and crawl out of your warm dung heaps, didn't you enjoy enough last night? If you're not even enthusiastic about morning exercises, you're useless in this life. What's the point of living? Warriors, please continue to sleep, and then pray that your instructor suddenly died outside last night, pray that all the adults have gone mad and give you a day off. The reprimands that new recruits who were slow or slept more soundly heard every day were almost all different. In their spare time, the recruits would even compare which camp was scolded the worst, the most interestingly, and even selected the 2 most popular people who woke them up, the most hurtful needle-tongue, and the mute who expressed the deepest contempt with their eyes. In any case, no one dared to be lazy at this time. The horror of the small dark room was already well known, and if they were completely abandoned, it was said that they would be sent to the research department. The instructors always said to the recruits under their command with a terrible smile that everyone had an irreplaceable role in the research department, anyone. Vague rumors are most likely to penetrate people's hearts. Under the constraints of laws and punishments, the recruits quickly transformed and grew. Fortunately, today's performance was better than usual. In just a quarter of an hour, the training ground had quieted down, and all the recruits were already neatly dressed in armor, gathered in their teams and affiliations in front of their instructors. Only a quarter of an hour. The recruits didn't dare to show any expression on their faces, but they couldn't help but feel a little proud in their hearts. The instructors, however, remained unmoved. Attention! The instructor's first instruction never changed. The recruits under his command straightened up with a snap. Long live King Joffrey I! Justice will prevail! The full-throated shouts of 100 people, gritting their teeth, resounded throughout the training ground, and were still clearly audible in the ears of 1,000 or 2,000 people. Everyone felt that their shouts were enough to spread throughout the city, but what was the actual situation? They looked at the instructor. The instructor nodded slightly. This was already the greatest praise. Immediately afterwards, the slogans on the training ground rose and fell, each team trying its best to exceed the volume of all the teams in front. Long live King Joffrey I! Justice will prevail! Again and again, again and again. The sound came from the front, from behind, from the side. What an emotional and enthusiastic cheer! The recruits' hearts were calm, only calmly judging which team had the loudest and steadiest voice, and which team had someone cracking their voice. After all, they had to listen to it hundreds of times every day, and even heard their companions shouting slogans in their sleep. After only a few days, they were guaranteed that all the fresh and interesting feelings would be completely wiped out. But to say they were annoyed, that wasn't really the case. It had just become a familiar habit, taken for granted, returned to the ordinary. Just like air, bread, and water, bland and tasteless, but an essential part of life. Dong! A huge drum sounded. All the recruits stood quietly, waiting for the music to follow. A melodious tune gradually sounded from nowhere, somewhat sad, somewhat peaceful, somewhat light-hearted, and some indescribable feeling. In short, it was completely different from the bard's harp. This song is called Mother Westeros. The prelude is over. Everyone sang in unison. Summer is gone, summer is gone. Winter is coming, the light will rest. We have finally overcome the obstacles ahead. As for the glory, let it belong to heaven. Let the golden years we once had remain in song after song. Remaining in that headwind of victory. In order to make you stand proudly on top of the world. For you, Great Mother. We will persevere. For you, Great Mother. We will eventually return in triumph. For you, Great Mother. Shout long live, 3 times for you. For you, Great Mother. Westeros, I will always be your child. Summer is gone, summer is gone. Winter is coming, the light will rest. Fighting on your suffering body, I still remember. The rushing black water brings fish. The dancing golden millet exudes fragrance. The swaying red apple oozes honey. Lying on your suffering body, I still remember. Winterfell, where hot springs flow, is your outpost guarding the north. The Eyrie, towering into the clouds, is your watchtower guarding the east. Riverrun, with its turbulent waters, is the tip of your trident. Casterly Rock, which never falls, is the mountain and mine you bestow with gold. Storm's End, which stops the storm, is your toy placed by the sea. High Garden, rich in fruits and flowers, is the land where you feed your children. Sun's Pear, cast in sand and stone, is the tenacious fortress on your severed arm. And your cherished Pearl, King's Landing, surrounded by the black water. Westeros, I will always be your child. Summer is gone, summer is gone. Winter is coming, the light will rest. We have already set off. For you, Mother. Walking in the vast fields, I can't help but. I love you. Strolling on the endless coastline, I whispered. I love you. Wading through the vast ice and snow, I silently confide. I love you. Westeros, I will always be your child. Wherever I am, you are always in my heart. Until death do us part. It is said that the words were written by the king himself. After the singing ended, the instructor's emotions only lingered for a few breaths, and then he still issued orders without hesitation: right turn. Running stance. The first team of recruits took the lead in entering the outermost track. This lap was a full 1,000 steps, and they had to run 10 laps in a row to complete it, and no one could fall behind. The team with the worst performance would have their breakfast cancelled. For the recruits who trained hard all day, a breakfast was an absolute lifeline, and everyone had to compete madly for it. At the end, Hot Pie collapsed on Gendry as usual, drooling. Compared to before, Hot Pie was much thinner and stronger at this time, but he still couldn't reach the average level, and training was still difficult. I figure, see, come out, the security bureau really, is nothing, just, through us, here, with you, guys, extra, benefits, not a single, one. Hot Pie kept panting, and didn't forget to complain in between. Gendry handed the breakfast box to Hot Pie. Hang in there, it won't be so tiring tomorrow. We all have outside missions. He had been granted divine grace and would lead the team in tomorrow's mission. Hot Pie looked forward to it, then today's training. Gendry shook his head calmly, morning standing in military posture, afternoon practicing skills, unchanged. Hot Pie sighed again and again. Chapter 96, God's Will. July 26th, early morning. The square outside the Great September of Baelor was already filled with countless believers. For the past 2 days, the city had been buzzing with the news that the church would designate every Sunday as a day of worship, requiring all believers to serve with piety and pray with a calm heart on this day. The devout believers were overjoyed and had made a special trip to the Great September of Baelor to demonstrate their sincerity. However, they had arrived too early. The 7 gates of the Great September of Baelor remained tightly closed, and not a single monk or nun was to be seen. People could only wait in the square outside. Most of the believers were either sitting or standing, with their eyes closed and silent, but some were beginning to whisper to each other. I heard that His Majesty arrived at the September last night and prayed tirelessly throughout the night. Even the establishment of the day of worship was His Majesty's idea. No wonder His Majesty is so beloved by the gods, and blessed with infinite divine grace. Yes, indeed. He is truly a divine envoy spreading glory and the gospel. The world is blessed. Have you guys heard about that? Someone whispered mysteriously, the church has been wrong all along. It's not the 7 stars, but the hexagram, with the Heavenly Father in the center. Impossible. It must be those people spreading rumors. 7 gods, if it's not 7 stars, what else could it be? Someone cautiously pointed out the fallacy, the gods are actually one and the same. The gods we worship are just one facet cast down by Him. 7 gods is just a mortal term for Him. According to this, it doesn't necessarily have to be 7 stars. A hexagram or even a circle is fine. They are all just mortal prejudices. People couldn't help but gradually argue. Someone chuckled coldly, arguing about dogma at the entrance of the Great September of Baelor, how brave. A bunch of incurable fools. As soon as these words came out, everyone quickly calmed down and tacitly ended the topic. Before long, someone suddenly complained, there are suddenly so many guards at the city gate this morning, each with their eyes wide open, as if everyone is carrying a knife in their arms. That's right, I saw it too. They came out of the Gold Cloaks camp, those new recruits. You guys don't know this, do you? Let me tell you the truth, my nephew is an officer in the Gold Cloaks, in charge of 100 people. An energetic old man boasted with beaming eyebrows. He told me personally that His Majesty will be speaking at the September today. In order to protect His Majesty's safety, many people have been added to the 7 city gates, and they are being strictly checked. Who can harm the divine envoy? Who would dare to do such a thing? I heard someone reported that Renly is afraid of losing the war to His Majesty and has bought assassins to sneak into the city. They might strike at any time. It must be related to this. Ah, is that so? How terrible! How despicable! That's right. The price of bread has already started to rise these past few days, and he's probably happy about it. I heard that Storm's End is holding banquets every day now, with endless fine wine and dishes, and they are collecting girls from all over the Stormlands to dance and accompany them at night. When they are tired of them, they throw them to the soldiers under their command. Oh my God, how can they do that? He is the dignified Duke of Storm's End, and the vast Stormlands are all his, of course he won't feel sorry for them. His Majesty Robert is too kind to him. Who says otherwise? People's impression of Renly became even worse. Hey, look, the Father's gate is open. Someone reminded excitedly. The square quickly became agitated, and everyone looked forward excitedly, casting reverent gazes at the figures walking out of the Father's gate. The bloated High Septan wore his shiny rainbow crown as always, but its brilliance was completely overshadowed by His Majesty, who was draped in boundless pure white light in front of him. His Majesty took 2 steps forward and immediately became as tall as the September, with light like the sun. People knelt down in droves, ready to listen to the will of the divine envoy. Joffrey stood by the podium and looked down. There was a sea of people, at least tens of thousands, and this was without a vigorous call to action. The influence of the church was evident. The more it was like this, the more satisfied Joffrey was with the manifestation of divinity during his coronation. No matter how powerful the church develops, it cannot escape its own limitations, and it must rely on the image of the 7 gods to promote its dogma. It's okay in the ordinary world. It's just a matter of who can fool people better, but here, a miracle can usurp most of the church's fruits of victory. Look now, the church has spent countless years painstakingly creating the 7 gods worshipped by the world, but in the end, Joffrey easily snatched the position of spokesperson, making the 7 gods a sacred coat draped on his body. Reality is cruel, and no one can easily accept it. The High Septan was initially unwilling to admit defeat, but that summons completely changed his mind, and he was able to stand behind Joffrey and continue to be his High Septan. Compared to him, the fate of several colleagues who chose to resist was much more miserable. Joffrey opened his mouth, his tone sad and painful. Brothers and sisters who serve with sincerity, I must announce a heartbreaking message here. All the believers were immediately stunned. What major event had happened that was worthy of His Majesty, blessed by God, to do this at this time? The king continued, someone sneaked into the September last night and attempted to create a massacre. In order to protect everyone in the September, 3 High Septans, 19 monks and 7 nuns were brutally murdered. Boom! The crowd in the square was in an uproar. A team of monks and guards walked out of the Father's Gate and dragged the corpses of 7 assassins into the square. The believers immediately surrounded them. After investigation, these assassins were hired by Renly Baratheon, well-trained, well-paid, and even given the title of Rainbow Guard by Renly, specializing in assassination activities. People lifted the white cloth covering the corpses, and the colors of the rainbow were revealed under the black tattered coats, one color for each person, just right. The Great September of Baelor is such a glorious and sacred place. Renly actually used assassins and daggers to desecrate it. This is not only a challenge to the laws of the world and the majesty of the throne, but also a contempt for the 7 gods and a trampling on our faith. The king's voice was filled with obvious anger. Everyone, can you agree to this? We don't agree. We don't agree. Someone immediately responded loudly, which then aroused more support, and finally converged into a chorus of countless people. We don't agree. The 7 gods have bestowed a divine decree. The king announced the decree, his voice resounding through the sky. His first palace in the mortal world is the Great September of Baelor, and the center of his gaze is King's Landing. The Holy Land must be clean and pure, without a trace of filth or a hint of darkness. From this day forward, the king shouted with his arms raised. Lambs, listen to the call and cast aside all worldly extravagance. We will cleanse every corner, cleanse every heart, return King's Landing to cleanliness, and return peace to the Great September of Baelor. Renly's assassins have nowhere to hide, liars and robbers have nowhere to escape, all shadows will be driven away, and light is eternal. The king shouted firmly and piously. At this time, groups of monks, nuns, and soldiers poured out of the Father's Gate and walked towards the square, towards the southeast, northwest, and every corner of King's Landing. The believers quietly bowed down to the ground, waiting for everything that was about to happen. Many people still did not understand what the king's words specifically meant. But after all, it was a divine decree, and mortals could only obey. And without a doubt, the commotion would not be small. Chapter 97 Washing Away the Dust. Gendry and 20 recruits had arrived at the area they were responsible for blockading. This area was located in the Renaissance Hill, north of the Street of the Silent Sisters, near the Old Gate, with luxurious brothels, mansions of dignitaries, and scenery such as sculptures, gardens, fountains, and murals. Gendry had never been here before, nor did he know anyone here, and he believed that the other 20 were the same. Hot Pie and many others were looking around, their faces full of amazement, even becoming more and more restrained and uneasy. Looking at them, they didn't seem like soldiers on a mission, but more like poor country bumpkins who had strayed into a high-end place and had never seen the world. Seeing this situation, Gendry decisively shouted the command, "Forward march!" Hot Pie and the others immediately straightened up as if by conditioned reflex, regaining their serious expressions, and marched forward in neat steps. 1-2-1, 1-2-1, 1-2. Gendry ignored the surprised gazes of pedestrians and focused on thinking about his mission. After the morning exercise today, everyone was assigned tasks, divided into 1,000 small teams, each team with about 20 people. 800 of these teams were responsible for blockading and guarding various parts of the city, 100 teams blockaded the city gates, and the last 100 teams were responsible for assisting various departments in carrying out tasks in various areas. Fortunately, the gold cloaks and recruits who had received the grace of the gods were almost all captains of their respective teams, and Gendry was also assigned to his own team and task area. Grid 239, this was the name displayed on the God's Grace light screen for this area at this time, and Gendry's team was naturally Team 239, with a total of 21 members. Although he only had 20 people under him, Gendry was already very satisfied. In less than half a month, he had gone from being a blacksmith's apprentice to the captain of 20 soldiers, and had even been granted the grace of the gods by His Majesty. No one could ask for more. Everyone in the barracks was full of hope. His Majesty not only provided generous and thoughtful treatment, but also established a clear reward system. Regardless of background or status, everyone could receive everything they deserved after proving their ability and making meritorious contributions: gold dragons, honor, protection, and promotion. Regardless of background? At first, No one dared to believe it, but one living example after another gradually appeared before their eyes. Team leaders, centurions, quartermasters, scribes, outstanding recruits were granted the grace of the gods and became officers. Among them were sons of merchants, orphans without parents, impoverished commoners, and even beggars. Everyone knew how ordinary and even difficult these lucky ones' lives had been before. Just like everyone else, they didn't believe they could become much better people. They didn't think about anything, and did everything they could just for a full meal and a cotton coat. The reason they responded to the royal family's call was just to sell their lives. They never had any long-term plans. After all, no one at that time thought that the army would continue to exist. Obviously, after the end of Renly's rebellion, the army should naturally be disbanded, the officers would return to their families to continue enjoying life, and the surviving soldiers would face life with scars and suffering. Soldiers who grabbed spoils of war could quietly savor their past experiences in the second half of their lives. Unlucky soldiers could only work, rely on relatives and friends, try every means to earn bread, endure people's ridicule, and even have to tell stories about their war career in exchange for a meal or a glass of ale. Everyone knew it. This is war and its soldiers. It has always been like this. But now it seems to be changing. The mission of this army does not seem to end when Renly's rebellion ends, and the soldiers do not seem to be just dispensable grains of sand. Show ability and loyalty, make meritorious service, turn from grains of sand into real people, and create their own stories. The more examples of such deeds, the more ardent and bright everyone's eyes become, and the more sincere and enthusiastic the laughter and songs in the barracks become. Until now, everyone has believed that they also have a bright future. Who can no longer strive for progress? Gendry also secretly made up his mind. He would do every task perfectly, fight a few more battles, put down Renly's rebellion, and live to the end. Perhaps becoming a general was not impossible. General, Gendry. By then, he should have a surname. What surname should he take? It all starts today. Holy Land Radiance, Act 1. Washing away the dust, Gendry looked at the name of the task on the brilliant light screen in front of him, full of confidence. Dust, no matter how much dust there is in King's Landing, it is still just dust. Gendry clicked on the task map on the light screen. King's Landing had been divided into 800 grids. Most of the grids were white, which meant that the task force was already in place and could be blockaded at any time as soon as the order was given. A few were black, which meant that the task force had not yet arrived and needed more time. Gendry also knew that after the order was issued later, the successfully blockaded grids would turn green, and the problematic grids would turn red, and nearby teams would have to provide support, but also ensure that their own grids were not affected. After all the grids turned green, all the teams responsible for carrying out various investigation tasks would begin to act, and would appear on all God's Grace light screens in the form of blue light spheres. The grids after the investigation would turn white again, and some of the task forces would continue to guard the grids, and some would join other grids or investigation teams. Throughout the process, all teams must pay attention to the changes in the blue light spheres at all times. A steady flashing light sphere indicates that everything is normal. A flashing light sphere with red stripes indicates that nearby teams need support. A completely red flashing light sphere indicates that it is under attack and all available teams need to provide immediate support. As for more dangerous situations, that is not the concern of the teams all over the city, and more powerful big figures will deal with it. Gendry thought of the face with hideous burns, the commander of the King's Landing City Watch, Sandor Clegane. Fire, what a terrible power! Although he had only seen it once, Gendry was very sure that no one could resist that kind of power, that was an even more awe-inspiring divine grace. At this time, the last grid on the light screen turned white. Gendry's spirits lifted, signaling the team to prepare, while he stood still, waiting for the order with his eyes and beating heart. Bang! A glowing scroll popped out of the light screen, suddenly unfolded, revealing golden text. Grid network activated. Gendry turned to the 20 soldiers, raised his right arm, took a deep breath. Start the operation, complete blockade, no entry or exit allowed. Hot Pie and the others stood at attention and saluted, yes. Gendry began to issue orders, you 3 go to that alley, you 5 block the main street, you 2 go over there, you 5 call everyone over, report any situation immediately. Yes. Everyone in the team became busy. The expressions of the pedestrians who saw the soldiers' actions immediately became panicked, and they subconsciously wanted to run away. Gendry drew the sword from his waist, by order of His Majesty, investigate the entire city, no one is allowed to move, if you move again, you will die for nothing. The cold light of the blade shone, extremely convincing. Looking at the crowd that had quieted down, Gendry did not completely relax. There are many big figures here, who usually call the wind and summon the rain, and have great power. Are there any dust among them? He took out a white steel ball and activated the button. Hopefully this treasure will work. Chapter 98, Second Purge Team. While his subordinates were carrying out their tasks, Tyrion curiously eyed the white steel ball in Jon's hand. Jon, what treasure is this? The various novelties he had seen this morning had broadened Tyrion's horizons. He hadn't realized that magic had so many wonderful uses. No, he should call it divine grace now. Jon stared intently at the warning sphere in his hand, and only relaxed slightly when he found that the warning sphere showed no abnormal reactions. Lord Tyrion, this is called the Eye of Vigilance. It's a new gadget from the research department. Once activated, it can see the entire boundary of the grid. Anything that crosses the boundary will trigger it and record an image of that thing. Jon stroked the warning sphere. Most of the time, that thing is a person, our target. Although this was the first time it was being put to use, and he had only gotten his hands on it 2 days ago, Jon and the soldiers had practiced many times, simulating actions after the Eye of Vigilance issued an alarm, arresting suspicious people, all to ensure that nothing went wrong. Despite this, Jon sincerely hoped that everything would be peaceful and that swords wouldn't have to be drawn. What a treasure, Tyrion exclaimed, Qyburn is quite capable. It hasn't been long, but he's already produced so many results. Not simple. Tyrion always felt that this Eye of Vigilance could have greater uses, not just for guarding the house. Jon chuckled lightly, that's right, the research department's reputation has spread throughout King's Landing, and it has even become a terrifying legend to scare children. Due to repeatedly escorting criminals to Qyburn, Jon was relatively familiar with the research department. He knew that the research department did have many projects that required personnel cooperation, but most of them were very safe and generally didn't cause any trouble. It was just that, for some reason, the rumors outside became more and more fierce. Some people even believed that Qyburn had to eat human hearts every day, using infants and brain matter to refine potions to extend his life and please nobles. However, thanks to Qyburn, King's Landing had been much more peaceful recently, and Jon's patrols were much easier. Under Qyburn's prestige, habitual offenders didn't dare to commit crimes again, fearing that if they were caught again, they wouldn't go to jail, but would be sent to the research department to be tortured to death. Jon could only envy this. He was just an unknown junior officer, but Qyburn, who had been expelled from the Citadel, was already in charge of a region, deeply trusted by the king, and had created so many magical creations. Without a doubt, Qyburn's name would be in future history. Renly's Rebellion. Jon knew this was his best opportunity, to fight a good battle, so that Robb would know even in Winterfell. Winterfell. Jon could hardly remember what it looked like. Fortunately, his father's appearance was still clear. His father had returned to the north to resist the wildlings and the increasingly awakening others. That must also be a difficult and glorious war. I hope everyone is safe. Despite missing everyone in the north, Jon did not regret it. It was already unchangeable, his place was here. Jon, it seems we're behind, Tyrion sighed, looking at his divine grace light screen. Jon also looked at his light screen. Grid 601 in the south of the city had turned white. Checked, so fast. Jon looked around the city and found that the other 6 teams were about the same as his side, still staying in the first grid. Fortunately, there were no warning signals. Jon knew that the leader of the fastest 6th team was the Hound, his current commander. Tyrion appeared calm, your Commander Sandor is really impatient, I don't know if he checked carefully enough. Each team was responsible for a full 100 grids, and they would be busy today. Forget it, Jon, let's go take a look too, lest we become the slowest team. Tyrion still strode his short legs and walked into the luxurious hotel in front of him. This was the last checkpoint in the 201st grid. Fortunately, so far, the inspection work of the Second Purge team, which Tyrion was in charge of, had gone smoothly, without encountering any noteworthy resistance or opposition. The prior planning was very thorough. The squads blocking the grid and the intelligence personnel in the team were responsible for collecting the personnel information in the grid. The team simultaneously inspected shops, factories, land, affiliation contracts, and valuables, clarifying their ownership and tracing them back to the earliest verifiable source to determine whether they were reasonable and legal. The judge, of course, was Tyrion himself. And this hotel was no exception, with all the planned steps taking place inside. Unfortunately, the owner of this hotel was not present, so several servants and stewards replaced the boss, being strictly questioned by the scribes, repeatedly explaining everything they knew. Even more soldiers directly broke into each room, searching for all the papers, letters, and belongings, demanding on-site claims and explanations of the source, otherwise they would be treated as unclaimed items. People only felt that this was robbery. Fortunately, these robbers still had some conscience, giving everyone a chance to persuade them to return the wealth. As long as the reasons were appropriate and the evidence was sufficient, there was hope to get their things back. And among these robbers, there were actually many monks and nuns, who claimed that this was to cleanse the filth of people's hearts, to completely eliminate Renly's assassins from King's Landing, and to return a clean and peaceful Holy Land. After taking back everything that belonged to them, people silently accepted this statement. The gods had already shown their power, and such a tragedy still happened in the Great September of Baelor. It was no wonder there was such a big commotion. After all, it was a sacrifice for the gods, so it was okay to be a little troublesome. People thought so. But finally someone chose to resist. The reason was very simple: his wealth was not returned. People cast sympathetic glances at him, and then watched from the sidelines. "What's going on? Who's shouting?" a loud voice questioned. The crowd made way for the owner of the voice. Tyrion slowly walked over, sizing up the middle-aged man with white hair in front of him. "What do you want to do?" Tyrion seemed very incomprehensible. The white-haired man was furious. "Respectable sir, I have complied with all the laws of Westeros, why should you withhold the gold coins in my room?" Tyrion glanced at his subordinates, and the scribe immediately leaned over to explain in a low voice. The white-haired man was agitated. "Those are all I keep for my clients. Let me remind you, sir, my clients are all upright gentlemen, big figures in King's Landing." Tyrion looked around. The room was gorgeous and exquisite. "You are a moneylender." The white-haired man nodded, righteously. Tyrion chuckled twice. "Arrest him." Before the white-haired man could react, 2 gold cloaks immediately stepped forward and pinned him down. Tyrion looked around the crowd and announced loudly, "His Majesty has already issued a clear decree that any private lending or collection of funds is considered illegal. I ask you, have you obtained royal permission?" "Decree? When did that happen?" The white-haired man wanted to argue, but the 2 gold cloaks behind him twisted hard, and the sharp pain in his shoulders made him only be able to let out meaningless wails. "No matter whose money this is, it is now illegal funds, and naturally it will be collected as evidence of the crime. Could it be that you still have reason?" A small interlude. Tyrion waved his hand as an end. "Take him away, dismiss the team." The grid inspection was completed, everything went smoothly. Chapter 99. Flea Bottom. It was noon. The 4th clearance team finally faced its greatest challenge, Flea Bottom. This place was home to the most wretched and impoverished people in King's Landing, composed of narrow alleys and haphazardly built shacks, the only refuge for beggars, orphans, and the homeless. It was also the biggest tumor of King's Landing. For centuries, Flea Bottom had been a lawless place, known for its chaos and ubiquitous stench. Even the gold cloaks on patrol were unwilling to approach, letting this slum and its discarded people rot as they pleased. But today, even Flea Bottom was within the scope of the city-wide purge. The 4th clearance team's task was quite arduous. Standing at the edge of grid 441, Theon Greyjoy frowned, his face full of disgust and revulsion. "Flea Bottom is even more disgusting than I imagined, worse than a pigsty." Since joining the Gold Cloaks, Theon had been patrolling the Red Keep and the city's prosperous areas, and this was the first time he had seen Flea Bottom's condition with his own eyes. It was unimaginably filthy, filled with all kinds of garbage that assaulted the eyes. Theon really didn't want to step into it. No wonder His Majesty wanted to tear it down and rebuild it completely. Theon recalled the task the king had personally instructed, and immediately felt it was even more difficult and tricky. Colonel Yoram Mormont of the Department of the Army beside him also had a solemn expression. "Commander Theon, the situation here is complicated. Not only is the environment complex and crowded, but the people are also chaotic and ignorant. I'm afraid it won't be easy to carry out His Majesty the King's orders." From his interactions that morning, Yora's evaluation of Theon was neither good nor bad. In general, he was a young man eager to show off, proud and impetuous. But Yora did not underestimate this inexperienced colleague. Regardless of the Greyjoy family's background, Theon's current position alone was enough to show that his status in the king's heart was not low. You should know that the officers of the Department of the Army were granted ranks such as General, Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel, and Major, and the organization of the King's Guard, which was reorganized from the King's Landing garrison, was similar. As the commander of the King's Guard, Theon was in charge of 1,000 men, and he was already at the same level as Yora, the colonel of the Department of the Army. Moreover, in terms of age and future, Theon, who had just come of age, undoubtedly had a brighter future. A young man to be feared. Yora suddenly sighed. After this war is over, perhaps it's time to go home and take a look, and leave the stage to the young people, the next generation of the Seven Kingdoms. Theon's expression gradually calmed down. I still need Colonel Yora's support. If we work together, no matter how much filth and stubbornness there is in Flea Bottom, it can only disappear according to His Majesty's wishes. Yora looked ahead. What are we waiting for? Let's begin. Theon waved his hand behind him, and the 4th clearance team immediately stepped into grid 441. The people inside were already restless. The situation this morning was too unusual. Everyone was resting when more than 20 soldiers suddenly broke in, and without saying a word, they gathered everyone in an open space, not allowing them to move, as if they were guarding prisoners. Originally, this was nothing. Living in a place like Flea Bottom, who hasn't been harassed by the gold cloaks a few times? In the end, they all obediently gave up. But the soldiers' methods today began to become strange. Everyone knew very well that there were countless alleys and holes in the houses here. Even after living here for 10 or 20 years, no one dared to say that they could figure them all out. It was impossible for just 20 or so newly arrived soldiers to search out everyone. The people who were unlucky enough to be taken to the open space by the soldiers were actually laughing in their hearts, and even winking at their companions hiding in the dark. But later, everyone saw with their own eyes that the leading soldier was holding a small white ball, looking at it from time to time, and then letting the soldiers go and catch people back, and it was always accurate. Those caught were usually the most clever guys. This was terrible. Everyone understood what this meant. Flea Bottom was no longer everyone's safest little nest. As long as the gold cloaks were willing, they could completely overturn Flea Bottom at any time with just a few hundred or thousands of people. More and more people gathered in the open space, and the atmosphere became more and more uneasy. What did the gold cloaks want to do? No one knew. Occasionally, someone would boldly ask, but they only received perfunctory responses or incomprehensible words. Unable to get an answer, people quietly gave their own ideas. Some people thought that they were trying to find a big shot hiding in Flea Bottom, some were worried that the coppers in their hands would not be kept, and some even thought that the gold cloaks were going to kill everyone. Massacre. This idea uncontrollably entered everyone's heart. Yes, why not? In the eyes of outsiders, Flea Bottom is only stench, filth, and sin, and should not exist at all. Without Flea Bottom, the big shots would probably only clap their hands and cheer. Look at the current situation. Everyone has been caught together, and the gold cloaks are not even willing to let go of anyone. What else could it be for? A large group of bright soldiers approached with a clatter. Hundreds of eyes in the open space looked over, their eyes revealing numbness, unease, panic, disgust, and resentment. The officer in black armor and gold robe at the head was very young. By His Majesty's decree, I, Theon Greyjoy, Commander of the King's Guard, am leading a team to clear Flea Bottom, sort out the alleys and houses, and eliminate rebels. Everyone must cooperate. The officer waved his hand, and a large group of people holding crystal balls immediately flashed out behind him, all wearing clothes that were too clean to appear in Flea Bottom. One of the crystal balls lit up in front of a person, and then spoke on its own. Lemon cakes, how much wealth do you have? What assets do you have? How did you obtain them? Who can vouch for you? Black Dog was stunned for a while in front of this strange voice before he remembered the silver stag he got when the king was crowned. In order to deal with the person in the table, he temporarily made up a new name for himself, Lemon Cakes. Before, Black Dog had never tasted it, only smelled the crazy fragrance on the passing cart. He didn't know why he remembered its name at that time. But after getting the silver stag that day, Black Dog tasted them to his heart's content. The taste of the cakes crumbling on the tip of his tongue was truly sweet and unparalleled, and he could still clearly recall it now. My wealth and assets? The fierceness in Black Dog's eyes gradually faded, turning into inexplicable confusion and sadness. with a strange smile on his face, "No, no, I have none." The crystal ball spoke again, "Lemon cakes, are you willing to respond to the royal call and crusade against the rebels?" Black Dog looked around, and many people in front of him had crystal balls flashing. "Take up swords and sell your life to the king above?" Thinking of the silver stag, and thinking of those cakes, Black Dog still felt that his life was more important. Black Dog racked his brains and tried to answer as tactfully as possible, "How can someone like me be qualified to go to the battlefield? I'm afraid I'll only cause trouble, so let's not." The crystal ball flashed, "Lemon cakes, a person with no identity, assigned to the engineering team, execute immediately." "What engineering team?" Before Black Dog could react, the shadows of 2 soldiers enveloped him from above, followed by 4 iron-like arms. Before being completely pressed down, Black Dog twisted his head and saw shining armor in all directions. "No one can escape," he thought amusingly and angrily. Chapter 100. By the time they reached the 449th grid, the 4th Purge squad had already rounded up 4,000 to 5,000 unregistered individuals. Zion hadn't expected the situation to be so extreme. Beggars, orphans, the disabled, the elderly, the foolish, the sick, the willingly degenerate. The majority of Flea Bottom was made up of these people, with no legitimate means of livelihood. How had they survived this long? Zion couldn't imagine the full extent. But he knew that these people's means of survival must be dark, born of sin, forced by sin, and adept at creating sin. It really was time for a cleanup, in a place like this. Zion was beginning to understand the king's feelings. But cleaning up wasn't easy. The people of Flea Bottom were almost all slippery as eels, and very few were willing to comply with the arrangements. In order to implement the plan, the Purge squad had to take coercive measures. After all, His Majesty had spoken. These people couldn't be allowed to continue to degenerate, but must be found a way out, for King's Landing, and for their own future. King's Landing could no longer have beggars or thieves. Unfortunately, these people probably wouldn't think that way. Although swords were drawn, if anyone lost their mind and started a riot, it wouldn't be easy to deal with. Zion stared at the slightly chaotic scene, his face growing more and more serious. There were too many people who needed to be forcibly detained. One soldier had to watch over more than a dozen, and even though these people were tightly bound together, they still looked very unsettling. "Yora, shouldn't we call for backup?" The situation seemed a bit grim, but it was still calm for now. Perhaps he was just scaring himself, and things were actually under control. Zion didn't want to admit the instability of the situation. Glancing at the crowded people around, Yora Mormont decisively sent an alert on the God's Grace light screen. "What are you waiting for? Call for people quickly. A few hundred people now are definitely not enough. A riotous crowd wouldn't care about swords. If thousands or tens of thousands rioted together, even if they couldn't defeat a well-trained army, the losses wouldn't be small. Once the reinforcements arrive, get these people out of here first," Yora said, looking at the thousands of prisoners. "We can't let the people of Flea Bottom see these captured guys. They won't think the best of it, they'll only become more and more panicked, until they finally go crazy and lose their minds, losing their fear of swords." "Very reasonable." Zion silently tapped the alert on the light screen. Zion was a little regretful. He should have started calling for people when he forcibly detained the first unregistered person. After all, he knew what extent he had to go to. Before Flea Bottom was destroyed, it would probably put up some resistance. Zion and the 4th Purge squad cautiously stopped, choosing to wait for reinforcements at the 449th grid, trying to ensure the mission went smoothly. Among the unregistered individuals being held together under guard, Black Dog was staring outwards with wide eyes. The reason why Flea Bottom had been able to exist for so long was certainly not just because of the harsh environment, or the constantly replenished poor people. Black Dog knew another important reason: gangs and powerful figures behind them. Today, the gold cloaks were making such a big commotion, as if they were determined to turn Flea Bottom upside down. Anyone could guess that everyone who relied on Flea Bottom for a living would not agree. The gangs would definitely take action. Black Dog was full of hope. When the time came, the gold cloaks would definitely not be able to take care of this side. As long as he seized the opportunity to break free of these ropes, hide in a place where no one could find him, and get through these 2 days, he didn't believe the gold cloaks would keep waiting. Although the gold cloaks' words sounded nice, Black Dog had no interest in the so-called construction team. He didn't understand many things, but at least he understood one principle: there was no such thing as a free lunch, and things that were rushed would never be good. He would rather continue to stay in Flea Bottom. Black Dog looked at the gang members in the crowd, his eyes full of hope and encouragement, wishing he could stand up and resist for those people. As long as he could escape today, that's all Black Dog was thinking. Now the Gold Cloak's swords had the upper hand, but they couldn't keep running over to scare people every day. Flea Bottom would always change back one day. As long as he could escape today. Whether it was because of Black Dog's gaze or not, someone finally made a move. "Sir Gold Cloak, may I ask what you are trying to do? This is lowly Flea Bottom, but it is also the only home for all of us. Who wouldn't be afraid?" Zion immediately glared fiercely at the speaker, his eyes full of murderous intent. "How dare you? I'll say it one last time, by order of His Majesty, purge the rebels of Flea Bottom. Everyone must obey obediently. You want to cause trouble." Several soldiers directly raised their crossbows and aimed at the man. That man looked straight at Zion, seeming to believe that he wouldn't act. "The moment you arrived, sir, you asked about the ownership of these houses and items, but you seem to have forgotten that this is Flea Bottom. How many people can produce the proof or contract you want?" The crowd instantly became a little chaotic. The soldiers lit up their swords and sternly rebuked them, which once again suppressed the situation. That man continued, "According to your meaning, does that mean that everyone can no longer live in these houses, even if they are already dilapidated, even if they haven't had a clear owner for hundreds of years? How do you plan to handle these houses? Just leave them empty, or destroy them completely?" There were actually voices of agreement in the crowd. What a vicious mind! Zion was almost about to order the man to be shot. Yora grabbed his arm. Zion turned his head, Yora shook his head slightly, his eyes also advising him to calm down. The reinforcements hadn't arrived yet. Once blood was shed, if the scene completely got out of control. Zion glanced coldly at the man. "Then what do you want to do? Let Flea Bottom continue to rot? Just drag it out? You live so hard, His Majesty is merciful, giving you a brighter way out. Who wouldn't want that? That's simply the number one fool in the world." The soldiers also conveyed contempt and incomprehension with their eyes, seeming extremely confused by the people's reaction at this time. The crowd gradually wavered a little. At least so far, no one had been killed. The monks and nuns and those people also didn't look fake, each of them were pious and gentle. Perhaps it really wasn't a bad thing? That man laughed loudly, pointing to the pile of people tied together. "Isn't it easy to say nice things? When we all become like that on the ground over there, wouldn't it be up to you, sir, to do whatever you want? Why don't you let us go first, sir? Wait a few days, if it really is a great thing, everyone isn't stupid, wouldn't they know how to choose?" The voices of agreement in the crowd became louder. This proposal was obviously the most in line with the wishes of most people. Zion looked around. Half of his soldiers were guarding the prisoners, dozens were beside the crowd, dozens were searching everywhere, and another 100 or 200 were guarding the boundary of the grid. Soon, several small teams had arrived. Zion stared closely at the light screen. Dozens or hundreds of small teams were already approaching Flea Bottom. It only took a quarter of an hour. "Stop! Don't move!" Yora's voice suddenly erupted. Zion glared over her fiercely. Several people had already run far away. That side was the grid that hadn't been checked yet. That man had already disappeared, and more people were also restless. "Watch the prisoners, guard the borders," Zion ordered through gritted teeth. In the end, swords would still have to be drawn. Chapter 101, read on the map. Gendry stared blankly at the light of grace. On the light screen, the light sphere not far to the south was flashing red, and more than a dozen grids nearby turned red at the same time, forming a patch. That was the 4th clearance team, that was Flea Bottom. "All guard squad leaders and their men will follow me to provide support," Commander Jon Snow ordered. Gendry belonged to the guards. The Light of Grace quickly updated his new task, to obey the command of Jon Snow, the 2nd commander of the guards, and assist in maintaining the stability of the alert grid. "Line up. Count off." Commander Jon's instructions were concise. Gendry immediately pulled all 20 of his companions over to line up, standing on the right side of the line to supervise, and shouting 21 loudly when it was his turn. The last number Gendry heard was 36. "Running formation, move out." Commander Jon ordered loudly, then ran ahead, followed by 36 squads in turn. Even now, Gendry's mind was still a little dazed. The whole process was too fast, leaving people no time to think too much, only to act according to the instinctive reactions from daily training. As the scenery on both sides of the street quickly slid behind him, Gendry finally had some spare time to sort out what he had seen and heard, and the situation he was about to face. Previously, the 239th grid that Gendry was responsible for had been successfully inspected. Although the clearance team didn't arrive until almost noon, during this long wait, the people in the grid were in a bad mood, and some even tried to cross the boundary, but overall it was stable, without bloodshed. After that, the arrival of the Hand of the King, Tyrion, and Commander Jon completely stabilized the situation. A huge team of nearly 1,000 people turned the area upside down. Everything in more than a dozen shops and brothels, more than 20 mansions, and dozens of houses was recorded, and everyone had nowhere to hide, and could only honestly answer questions and provide testimony. Gendry personally saw more than a dozen people being tied up and stuffed into sealed carriages along with the confiscated property. After all this was over, Gendry personally clicked Task Completed on the Light of Grace, restoring the 239th grid to white. This was his most glorious moment. Then he and his squad joined the clearance team and continued the next inspection. Lord Tyrion seemed very confident, and after inspecting each grid, he had all the station squads follow, no longer leaving anyone to guard, which also made more and more manpower available to the clearance team. Soon, the number of people in the clearance team was much larger than the number of people being inspected in a single grid, and the inspection work was smoother than ever before. Until the light sphere in the south had red stripes. From the beginning, Gendry had been paying attention to the mission map on the Light of Grace. The beginning of the morning's operation was when the colors of the grids all over the city changed most drastically. Some places turned red for a while, then green for a while, and the nearby squads ran around, chasing and blocking, just to eliminate that small piece of red on the map. Gendry could imagine the distress of his colleagues over there. The dense crowd was disobedient, moving frequently, and some people even deliberately made trouble, instigating the people to riot. King's Landing was not a pool of clear water after all. After that, Gendry had endured countless glares and taunts, and the color of the whole city finally stabilized, a reassuring green. After that, there were only occasional fluctuations wherever the clearance teams went, but they were quickly resolved. Until the light sphere of Flea Bottom began to have red stripes. This was the first clearance team to issue a warning signal. Lord Tyrion sent out 20 squads, and the other clearance teams also divided a part of their manpower. But before most of the reinforcements arrived, a large area of red lit up in Flea Bottom again. What would the situation be over there? How bad would it be? Gendry felt uneasy. Not only was he worried about the chaotic scene that was about to come, but also about everyone in Flea Bottom. After all, he himself grew up in Flea Bottom. Although most of the experiences in his memory were not pleasant, at least there were a few partners who had supported each other, and the brown soup in the simple cafeteria also fed countless orphans and bastards. What would happen to Flea Bottom? In the neat line, Gendry's steps did not stop, but his heart was already in a mess. Stop! Commander Jon shouted loudly. Each squad leader leads their squad, closely guarding along the border. No one is allowed to approach within 20 steps, or they will be killed without mercy. Gendry and his squad blocked a section of the street. Behind them was Bread Street, where countless bakeries were opened, and the rich aroma of bread was permeating the air. Gendry anxiously paid attention to every move of the mission map. Except for where the clearance team was in the west, most of Flea Bottom was only left with a piece of crimson, and the squads inside had withdrawn to the border, lining up along the line with other squads that had rushed over, blocking the red in the encirclement. The clearance team in the west was pressing closer step by step, eating away at the red in the east grid by grid. But the speed was too fast. In just half an hour, 4 red grids turned green, and dense squads were staying on these grids. Gendry seemed to see the blood over there. After that, the clearance team cut off the red area from west to east, 1 red area in the south and 1 in the north, like 2 pieces of red meat on a butcher's board. The clearance team waved south, and this red area was quickly completely submerged. There was no movement for the next half hour. They should be cleaning up the battlefield and dealing with the prisoners, Gendry thought. Then all the squads in the south moved at the same time, pressing firmly northward, squeezing the last red to the northernmost side. The chaotic static gradually increased. Gendry woke up and raised his head. Countless figures in the south were approaching, aggressively, as if they were ready for a fierce battle. Commander John drew his long sword. Hold steady, don't forget the weapons in your hands. Be prepared. Prepare for what? Gendry didn't want to think deeply. The crowd had already pounced over, heads next to heads, with fierce expressions, waving daggers, axes, wooden sticks, stones, and so on in their hands. Get out of Flea Bottom! You eunuch gold robes bastards! Long live King Robert! If you don't give us a way to live, we'll fight you. Commander John put a piece of black dragon glass to his mouth, murmured a few words, and then pointed the dragon glass at the crowd. A deafening voice rang out from the dragon glass, by His Majesty's will, cleanse all dust. Flea Bottom and you will be redeemed, under the grace of God, you will not worry about food and clothing, the road ahead is bright, and there is even the Holy Star as a dwelling for the soul. Why must you offend the divine might? The movements of thousands of people were drowned out by this voice. Retreat quickly. With just you want to resist the divine will? Commander Zine walked over from the other side, also holding a piece of dragon glass in his hand. Gendry looked down, and the people of Flea Bottom were still moving, heading towards Renis's hill where he was. Everyone shut up. Back off. Commander Zine picked up a longbow. The crowd was closer, and had not quieted down. Gendry recognized a few familiar faces. Those young teenagers already had more ferocious or cold expressions, no different from the villains who used to oppress orphans. Crack! Gendry saw a face pierced by a long arrow, and seemed to hear the sound of a skull exploding. Quiet! Back down! Another long arrow flew towards a head. Chapter 102, Theon's Screaming Arrows. Theon was very proud of his archery skills. Ever since Winterfell, his bow and arrows had been the most skillful and proficient of anyone's. If he said he would shoot a copper coin, he would only hit the center of the seven-pointed star on the coin. The heads in front of him were nothing more than slow-moving targets, and he hit each one with precision. Knocking a screaming arrow, he aimed at the eye socket of a head and shot, shouting, "Silence! Fall back!" Then, he knocked another arrow, shot another noisy head, and activated the command token again, "Silence! Fall back!" His voice was loud and clear, repeating the cycle. Theon felt he could repeat this until all the hundreds of arrows in his quiver were used up. Even 3 or 5 more quivers would be welcome. 1, 5, 10, the figures Theon aimed at became farther and farther away, quieter and quieter, and the final expressions frozen on their faces became more and more distorted. It wasn't until he shot down someone who was about to turn and run that Theon slowly put away his longbow. The crowd below had retreated dozens or even hundreds of steps away, each with their mouths tightly shut, no longer daring to utter a single word. Theon smiled hatefully. They were truly a bunch of lowly bastards who wouldn't listen until they saw blood. Previously, he had captured 4,000 or 5,000 people, and in the cleanup after the chaos in Flea Bottom, he had caught several thousand more. Now, there were only a few thousand people left below, almost fewer than the surrounding soldiers. If a fight really broke out, Theon was confident he could chop off all their heads within half an hour. Jon stepped forward. "Theon, that's enough. They are calm enough and I believe won't do anything foolish again." What the king wanted was not just rotting, stinking heads, but more soldiers and more labor. Theon shrugged. "I think so too. Jon, we've finished our work. Lord Tyrion, it's your turn to step up." Tyrion reached out his hand. "His Majesty is truly partial, to have such a treasure that can make a sound like thunder, task tisk." Jon knowingly handed over his command token. The flat dragon crystal, polished into an oval shape, immediately gave Tyrion a familiar magical feeling as soon as he held it. "So that's how it's used." Tyrion quickly understood. He silently communicated with the information magic within the dragon crystal, activating it and using it to trigger the hidden sound rune energy to record external sounds. "I am Tyrion Lannister, Master of Coin. Everyone immediately drop your weapons, squat down in place, accept supervision and obey the will of the gods and His Majesty. The crimes you have committed today can still be forgiven." Tyrion raised the dragon crystal, activated the information magic within it, and triggered the response of the sound magic energy. A loud voice was then transmitted from the dragon crystal. The crowd woke up a little from their dazed confusion. All around were bright steel and soldiers, and serious and resolute orders echoed constantly in the air. The long arrows stuck in the corpses in front of them were still glaring. Who would have thought that the gold cloaks would be so ruthless? They had only gathered to say a few words, and they actually started killing. Many people couldn't understand what they had encountered today. Why bother? How much benefit could be gained from Flea Bottom with so much effort? Just for these rotten houses, for everyone who had nothing, even those who were missing arms and legs? Flea Bottom had never been so valued. They were the most invisible cockroaches and rats in King's Landing, and everyone would only avoid them from afar in disgust. They had thought that today would be similar. The gold cloaks would do their job perfunctorily, Flea Bottom would slightly display its filth, dispel the gazes of all the upper-class people who did not belong here, and then everyone would quietly continue to live. But everything seemed to be completely changing. Friars and nuns kept preaching doctrines and divine will, crystal balls demanded answers from everyone, and the gold cloaks detained everyone who was penniless, saying it was for everyone's good. Fortunately, someone ran out of the gold cloaks' encirclement and reminded everyone of the tragedies where the gold cloaks had gone. So everyone united and drove away the mere dozens of gold cloaks at various alleys and intersections. What followed should have been very simple. Everyone gathered together to resist, took up all the weapons that could boost their morale, and the gold cloaks would not risk doing anything more. But everything really changed. The gold cloaks did not retreat, but rushed over in groups of 20 or 30, their swords and spears bright and sharp. Everyone was more fragile than they had imagined. No one was stupid enough to be willing to block a knife for others, but instead cleverly fled in all directions where there were no gold cloaks, trying to shake off everyone behind them. Everyone quickly scattered completely, and no one knew where anyone was, only themselves. Later, the gold cloaks drove everyone into a pile again, like herding livestock. When they stood there, everyone consciously avoided that position, and finally gathered together somehow. People pushed people, people squeezed people, and no one knew where everyone was going, just kept walking. Finally, there were gold cloaks all around, and there was no direction to escape. For some reason, someone started cursing, like a spark in a haystack, immediately igniting everyone's anger. Someone began to shout, "Long live King Robert!" Ah, those were such good times. The silver stags thrown down by the nobles at the tournament were enough for dozens of partners to have a full meal for a day, and skilled people could also get a lot of rewards from the audience. Now it's different. The gold cloaks patrol the city non-stop, and prime ministers and regents have taken office one after another, but there hasn't even been a tournament. Someone began to curse the gold cloaks. These guys really deserved to be cursed. It was okay for them to bully everyone usually, but now they even wanted to cut off everyone's last way out. They simply didn't deserve to be human. Some people even whispered curses against King Joffrey. That rumor that not many people believed in the first place now seemed more like the truth. At least everyone was more willing to believe it. If Renly was the legitimate king, he probably wouldn't deliberately make things difficult for everyone in Flea Bottom, right? From the incessant shouts, everyone raised their arms, fists, and weapons, like an unstoppable torrent. The gold cloaks in front looked so small, as if they would break with a single poke. But all of this ended in thunderous shouts and whistling arrows. The people standing at the front were the first to decide to run back, but the people behind hadn't reacted yet. This was the time for the gold cloak officers' evil archery game, until everyone retreated together to the center of the encirclement, away from the roaring bows and arrows. At this time, looking at the gold cloaks again, each sword and each spear was so sharp and bright. How could human flesh compete with these steels? Clang clang! A dagger was thrown onto the open space in front, and the sound of it rolling on the stone slab was so obvious, making people's hearts sink, and then suddenly feel relieved. A large, indistinguishable sound occurred almost simultaneously, and everyone put down everything in their hands. Squat down in place, accept supervision, and obey the will of the gods and His Majesty. The crimes you have committed today can still be forgiven. The instructions in the air were still echoing non-stop. One by one, people lowered themselves, the crowd followed in a panic, and soon there was no one standing straight on their legs. The gold cloaks walked over in groups. Everyone quietly watched others and themselves being tightly tied up, their mouths stuffed with hard pieces of wood, and even black hoods were put on. Everyone inevitably felt fear. How would they be dealt with? What would happen to Flea Bottom? Everything was in the hands of the gold cloaks' swords. And the king at the highest point. Chapter 103, The King's Canvas. Your Majesty, what are you going to do with so many people? Tyrion asked sincerely. After a whole day of busy work yesterday, with the joint efforts of 20,000 soldiers and thousands of monks, nuns, scribes, and others, the cleanup of King's Landing has achieved great success. As of now, a total of 523,426 people have been registered. Among them, nearly 30,000 people were temporarily detained for various reasons, more than 1,000 rebels went to hell, and 31 soldiers returned to heaven. These have already been reported in the first half of the small council meeting just now. What should be done next? All the ministers quietly looked at His Majesty the King at the end of the long table. Joffrey's gaze was fixed on the model of King's Landing on the long table in front of him. Tyrion, what is the total area of the confiscated properties and land? Adding what the royal family originally had, does it account for half of King's Landing? Tyrion was stunned for a moment, and then quickly calculated in his brain. According to the latest measurement by the research department, in terms of the newly defined unit of measurement, the total area of King's Landing is about 71 square kilometers. Now, more than 300 brothels, more than 600 taverns and hotels, more than 800 shops, more than 1,000 warehouses, more than 3,000 residences, almost the entire Flea bottom have been confiscated, plus the royal family and the Lannisters' original properties, streets, squares, open spaces, and ruins. Well, about half of half. Your Majesty, King's Landing still has 500,000 people after all. Tyrion didn't understand what Joffrey meant. Could it be that the king is still not satisfied? Yesterday's actions had already shocked and worried Tyrion to the point of sleeplessness all night. He thought he was decisive enough, but who knew the other teams were even more ruthless. Those team leaders, squad leaders, and scribes only had the king's orders in their eyes and completely ignored the demands of the major forces. Last night, Tyrion held the thick clean-up account book, and both hands were constantly shaking. The king's claws were too capable. All properties and contracts with unclear ownership were invalidated, all wealth and materials of unknown origin were confiscated, and all people of suspicious origin or idle people were arrested. From the dense text, Tyrion clearly saw the shadow industries, contact points, and spokespersons of many families. Too reckless, too arrogant. Tyrion knew very well that King's Landing never belonged to any one person or any one family. Long before the Baratheon family moved into the Red Keep, the powerful nobles of the Seven Kingdoms and even across the narrow sea had taken root in King's Landing, secretly controlling countless industries and recruiting countless people. Countless powerful forces jointly wove a complex and tight network in King's Landing. Of course, the newly forged 20,000 swords could certainly cut off everything forcefully. But what about in the areas that swords can't reach? What about outside King's Landing? What about the commerce of King's Landing? Once the supplies sent by the port and roads are insufficient, how will the city operate? Tyrion stared blankly at the king's calm face, his chest feeling as heavy as if a large piece of granite was pressed on it. Joffrey, what are you thinking? Joffrey's idea was very simple, then continue to cleanse until half of King's Landing is cleaned up. Pointing to the model of King's Landing on the long table, Joffrey drew a line in the middle from the air, east of the central square. This half of the city must be cleared. By the will of the gods, I will paint here, painting a clean and brand new holy city. All the ministers' eyes were cast on the exquisite city model. The king's voice was still calm. Everyone who participated in the cleanup yesterday will be rewarded with a silver stag. Rest today, and continue the cleanup from tomorrow. Block off 100 grids every day, and the soldiers will be divided into 2 groups to take turns, led by Tyrion and Arryn. Arryn respectfully accepted the order. Tyrion really didn't want to hear his name. More than 10,000 people every day, only checking 1/8 of the city, presumably he will completely offend many people again. The king knocked on the table. Tyrion is in charge. Any methods such as industrial replacement and redemption are acceptable. I only want a blank and clean eastern half of the city. Before that, the city gates will continue to be closed. Except for fishermen, farmers, peddlers, coachmen, etc. who supply materials to the city, entry is allowed but exit is not. Tyrion understood what the king meant. It turned out that Joffrey was not greedy enough to only take in and not give out. He could use the properties and gold dragons in the western city to exchange for the eastern city. Although it was still difficult, it was easier for people to accept than just using swords to plunder. Tyrion. The king looked over with a smile. What do you think? Are there any difficulties? As you command. Tyrion bowed. Joffrey looked around at everyone. In order for King's Landing to transform into a holy city favored by the gods, not only the common people, but we must also embrace change. All the ministers immediately sat up straight, waiting for the king's instructions. Joffrey first looked at the elderly Grand Maester Pycelle. the maesters and apprentices under the national preceptor should also have a formal title. We can't just keep it vague like this. We can't let them just silently contribute to the kingdom. Your Majesty is so concerned, it is really, really touching. The Grand Maester excitedly wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Joffrey smiled slightly. The Ministry of Education. To educate the world for the gods, to dispel ignorance, and to spread knowledge, it should be the belonging and duty of the maesters. Please, National Preceptor, make a register as soon as possible, and be sure not to miss a single person. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, it will be completed within half a month. The Grand Maester vowed. Joffrey turned to Tyrion. I know that your task is arduous, and finance and cleanup are not easy tasks. What are the difficulties? Feel free to mention them. Tyrion wasn't that naive. I will listen to your Majesty's orders. Joffrey pondered for a moment, then looked at the proud Kingslayer. Sir Jaime, the Ministry of Finance bears a heavy mission and undoubtedly needs a stronger force. Allocate 4,000 new soldiers to form the investigative team under the Ministry of Finance. Lord Commander of the Kingsguard Jaime glanced at his short brother. Yes, Your Majesty. Joffrey looked at Aron again. You and Tyrion should communicate well, and distinguish your subordinates clearly. Little Birds and the new soldiers assigned to you will belong to the Security Bureau, and Tyrion's people will belong to the Kingdom Statistics Bureau under the Ministry of Finance. Don't call it the Master of Whisperers anymore. Joffrey gave Aron an encouraging look. Just call it the Minister of Security and manage the Security Department. Aron bowed excitedly to accept the order. Thank you for your Majesty's grace. Tyrion watched quietly. In just a moment, he had 4,000 more people under his command, as well as the brand new title of Investigative Team and Kingdom Statistics Bureau. Sir Barristan, Joffrey looked at the spirited Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. To this day, Aegon II died from poisoned wine, the Mad King Aerys died from swords, and there was also my father who was attacked by beasts. Don't you think the strength of the Kingsguard is too weak? Kingslayer Jaime's face immediately turned cold. Barristan Selmy knelt down on one knee in shame. I cannot make any excuses for myself, please punish me. Joffrey got up and helped Barristan up. I have no intention of doing so. It's just that 7 Kingsguard are not enough to deal with the threat. From today onwards, the Kingsguard will be set at 77 people. You are still the Lord Commander, and the other 6 Kingsguard will be in charge of a team, taking turns to guard. Lord Commander Barristan, do you agree? The king had even used the deaths of the previous kings as examples. What else could Barristan say? I obey your will. Joffrey looked at Tyrion again. As for the 30,000 people who are locked up. Chapter 104. Once this round of investigation is over, the estimated number will exceed 30,000. Among them, more than 20,000 are destitute and have unstable livelihoods, several thousand live by crime, and several thousand are unlucky ones with suspicious origins. This is a very considerable human resource. Joffrey had already made his plans. Sir Jaime, the Department of the Army can select 5,000 people from them to fill the ranks of new recruits. Selecting 5,000 of the most suitable people for combat, mixing them into the 20,000 new recruits, and then honing them, the final outcome will only be complete assimilation. After all, they have no choice. Ellen, you select another 5,000 people to act as eyes and ears, also receive new recruit training, and then supplement them into the Security Bureau and the Statistics Bureau. Weren't little birds once flown out from these people? Hannah, you take the lead in forming the Logistics Bureau, responsible for ensuring the supply of materials for various departments in the army. Select 10,000 people, using the foolish ones as labor, gradually promoting the smart ones, teaching them to read, learn arithmetic, and increase their knowledge, until they become qualified logistics officers. For these 10,000 people, becoming a logistics officer is already the best way out. If they still have a trace of reason and hope for the future, they should no longer harbor resentment. Tyrion, give you 10,000 people to form the Engineering Bureau. Starting in August, not just the sewers, the entire King's Landing will undergo a major change, especially the East City. Joffrey had already planned many factories and facilities. The last remaining ones will be handed over to the dungeons and the research department. They also need people. How is it? Joffrey smiled softly, very satisfied with his thoughtful arrangements. Tyrion verbally offered similar compliments to his colleagues, but in his heart, he kept thinking about the Logistics Bureau and the Engineering Bureau that the king had lightly mentioned. New departments with thousands upon thousands of people at the drop of a hat, throwing down large chunks of power, and also throwing out heavy tasks. What a whimsical 12-year-old king! Tyrion couldn't help but carefully recall that in just 1 month, Joffrey first pursued taxes from the Seven Kingdoms, promoted miracles, and then carried out large-scale reforms: the Department of the Army, the Research Department, the Security Bureau, the Gospel Department. Distributing divine grace, thoroughly investigating the entire city, arresting 30,000 people in one go, and it seems that he had already arranged places for these people to go. Tyrion watched from the sidelines, only feeling that Joffrey was treating King's Landing and even the Seven Kingdoms as a game, and the king himself was enthusiastically piling up his favorite sandcastle on the beach, smiling like a child. In fact, the king is indeed a child. And who doesn't have a child who never grows up in their heart? But no one can control the king's every move. Cersei's strong and tyrannical behavior completely disappears in front of Joffrey. Eddard could only offer a few light words of persuasion when he was in the Red Keep, let alone now that he has returned to the north. And the noble and proud Lord Tywin Lannister actually just silently watches the king act arbitrarily. Actually, it's no wonder. The king is a disobedient child, but he is also an envoy of the gods who wields unimaginable power. Possessing divine grace like magic, who dares to say that he is not a divine envoy? Anyone who opposes the king favored by the gods to his face must carefully consider whether they can withstand the wrath of the gods. Moreover, Lord Tywin is still the regent and lord of laws, his brother is the master of ships, his eldest son has become the minister of war, commanding the land forces of the Iron Throne, and his daughter is still the queen regent. Even this unloved youngest son of his is the master of coin of the small council. Thinking about it this way, the high and mighty Duke Tywin is simply the most powerful person in the Seven Kingdoms. Why should he refuse the young king? So, even Lord Tywin is like this. Could it be that such drastic changes in King's Landing will also be accepted by the people? Even if the king rudely seizes half of King's Landing and arbitrarily manipulates tens of thousands of people? Will it really be like this? Tyrion thought a lot, gradually beginning to doubt himself. Perhaps I am too pessimistic? Ahem, Joffrey put away his smile. Now that we've said all the nice things, it's time to discuss the difficulties we must face. Tyrion, start with you. Ah? Tyrion raised his head in confusion and looked at the king. Joffrey asked with a serious face, how many gold dragons are currently in the treasury? How many weapons? How much grain? How long is it enough to consume? Tyrion's mind had already turned back, including the new additions from yesterday. The treasury already has more than 1.76 million gold dragons, the armory can still equip 10,000 infantrymen, there are also more than 4,000 war horses, about 10,000 pack animals, and the stored grain is enough for the entire city to consume for a year. Among them, Littlefinger and Varys contributed a large part. Joffrey summarized for him, once the war starts, all aspects can only be supported for 1 year, right? Tyrion could only nod heavily. The expressions of the ministers all became serious, and no one could fail to hear how serious the situation was. 1 year is not short, but it is definitely not abundant. Who knows when the flames of war will be extinguished? After Renly, the Seven Kingdoms will probably not be stable instantly. 1 or 2 years. 3 or 5 years. All are possible. If the gold dragons and materials replenished during this period are not enough to support consumption, and when various reserves drop to the bottom line, coupled with debt and rebellion, then it will truly be a difficulty that can overwhelm the country. Joffrey turned to Ellen. What is the situation with the materials entering the city recently? Tell the adults about it. Ellen used his mind to move the light screen, calling up detailed data. The fish catches transported into the city by the fishermen on the riverbank and the harbor are relatively stable, and the supply of vegetables, barley, wheat, etc. from the farmers outside the city has not decreased. Together, they are enough to fill the bellies of 100,000 people. The grain transported by the families of the Crownlands has gradually decreased, and the day before yesterday it had decreased to 80% of the end of June, only enough to supply the needs of 300,000 people. The materials from the Stormlands and the Reach in the south have almost been cut off. Only sporadic small merchants enter the city, which is negligible. The Golden Road in the Westerlands is also threatened by the rebel soldiers in the south, and the caravans are pitifully few. Fortunately, the grain transported from the Riverlands and the Vale barely meets the needs of the remaining population in the city. But, Ellen said in a low voice, if this continues, within a month, there will be thousands upon thousands of starving people in King's Landing. the price of bread will rise crazily, unless we start releasing the grain stored in the Red Keep. The grain stored in the warehouse must not be touched easily. It is the greatest confidence and foundation for a long-term war. Tyrion suggested, how about inviting grain ships from Essos? At least the Sea Route and Blackwater Bay are still open. It has always been Westeros selling grain to the east, but now it is going to be the other way around. Joffrey decided to consider solutions nearby. Essos is too far away, the sea conditions are unstable, it is difficult to supply stably, and it will definitely be expensive. It is still the most stable to transport grain from the Crownlands and the Riverlands. He looked at the Kingslayer Jaime. Why are the families of the Crownlands reducing the supply of grain? Sir Jaime, please write a few letters to inquire. Jaime understood the king's subtext. If it still doesn't work, the new recruits should take a stroll outside the city. Joffrey said lightly, everyone, Renly's rebels will attack us in September, there is still 1 month left. Sort out King's Landing and the Crownlands, and take the first step in the construction of the Holy City. Renly is not to be feared. Joffrey stared at King's Landing on the table. Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone responded firmly in unison. Chapter 105, Brienne the Beauty. On the docks of King's Landing, Beauty Brienne tried her best to ignore the strange gazes of the crowd, staring straight at the rows of warships on the river. The most conspicuous was the Robert's Hammer. It was setting sail, the wind billowing its huge golden sails, causing the majestic black stag on the sail to sway. The dense rows of long oars hanging on both sides of the deck gradually swung, cutting through the water, moving it towards the channel. Brienne knew that this was the action of more than 400 oars and even more rowers and sailors. The Robert's Hammer waved its bright flag, and dozens of warships behind it moved accordingly. Brienne understood that this was training, just like her father's small fleet on Tarth often did. She looked to the right, and there were also dozens of warships moored near the inner river, their flagship being the Fury, which had 300 oars. It once belonged to Duke Stannis, but at this moment, it was anchored and the sails were furled, quietly berthed in the port of King's Landing. Earl Montfort Velaryon had told her that the current captain of the Fury was the commander of the Third Royal Fleet, Davos Seaworth, who fought for the Iron Throne and missed Shireen. Brienne looked to the left again. Dozens of warships were also docked in the berths by the sea. The flags on the first 3 warships were not clear, only a silver color and a few small golden spots could be vaguely distinguished. But she already knew that they were the warships of Earl Sunglass of Gulltown, the Piety, the Prayer, and the Dedication. The Dragonstone fleet had all gathered in King's Landing. How would Lord Renly cross the river? Brienne couldn't help but worry about the man she admired. At this moment, she should have been at Storm's End, guarding Lord Renly's safety, silently watching his back and every smile. Even if she had to endure everyone's ridicule or pity for this, Brienne would have been willing. Her height of over 6 feet and rough appearance had tormented her life. People secretly called her Beauty, but she knew they didn't even treat her as a woman. It was just a malicious nickname. Beauty Brienne understood her situation very early on. She didn't dare to dress like a noble lady, which would only make people laugh louder, but her efforts to arm herself as a warrior were also not respected. People then remembered that she was a woman. Her father tried his best to arrange 3 marriage contracts for her. But they were undoubtedly only for the territory and wealth of House Tarth. Not to mention love, they were unwilling to give her even a little respect. After she won the trial by combat, breaking the collarbone and 2 ribs of her third fiancé, Sir Humphrey, 65 years old, her father never mentioned the word marriage again. Brienne couldn't imagine who she would spend her life with, who she would laugh for, who she would miss, and how she would leave the world. Fortunately, Lord Renly visited Tarth during his coming-of-age tour. His smile was not false or sarcastic, his words were gentle and sincere, his eyes had a clean light, he was unlike anyone else. After her father sent her to Storm's End, Brienne gradually found the meaning of life. God's bless, as long as she could protect Lord Renly with swords, laugh for his smile, and die for protection and duty, it would surely be a happy and correct life. But now, everything had become a bubble. Under the shadow, Brienne silently looked up at the Pride of Driftmark in front of her. 2 weeks ago, it was the one that led 40 warships to besiege Duskendale. Tarth, isolated overseas, was unable to resist and had no support. Her father could only yield and send her to Velaryon's fleet. In the salty sea breeze and on the rushing warships, Brienne had to recognize reality. Not only could she no longer stay by Lord Renly's side to serve, but even her father and House Tarth would be forced to remain neutral, or even join the Iron Throne. Although the allegiance of Tarths' power did not affect the overall situation, it was indeed detrimental to Lord Renly. And if Earl Montfort's boasting was even 1/10 true, the power of the Iron Throne was absolutely beyond the imagination of the world, even comparable to an army of 100,000. King Joffrey, the heroic monarch in Earl Montfort Valerian's mouth, the hero king who saved the world from the long night, the messenger of the gospel favored by the gods, how much of this was true? If, unfortunately, the Iron Throne eventually won, how would he treat Tarth, how would he treat Lord Renly? The mist was too wide and too thick, and Brienne was at a loss. Earl Montfort approached and reminded, "Miss Brienne, please. King's Landing is different now. I hope you like it. I am Brienne of Tarth, a warrior, my own knight, and definitely not a miss." But Brienne was too lazy to argue any more. "I hope so." The group rode forward, unimpeded under the seahorse sigil, until they reached the mud gate outside. The smile on Brienne's face was undisguised. "It really is different. Even the dignified Earl Valerian has to dismount obediently and be checked by the gold cloaks." Earl Montfort smiled faintly. "For His Majesty's grand plan, this little trouble is not worth mentioning." Since he was granted divine grace on Dragonstone, he also knew a lot about King's Landing on the Narrow Sea. The sacred coronation, the will of the gods, the cleansing of the Holy Land and Holy City, the meticulous screening. The divine grace light curtain, what a great miracle! To this day, Earl Montfort was even more determined in his choice. His Majesty, who possessed such divine power, would surely seize eternal victory, and his subjects would be stained with glory and brilliance. Name? Age? Gendry looked at the person suspiciously, and added, "Gender." Although it happened often, Brienne couldn't help but be a little angry. "Brienne Tarth, 19 years old. Also, I am a woman, look carefully." Gendry nodded awkwardly, and asked a few more questions according to the procedure, using the voter registration in his hand to record Brienne's image. After the voter registration sent a permission to pass signal, he ended the city entry registration. Beyond the city gate, the scene inside the city had not changed much. Brienne remained calm on the surface, but she was very surprised by the black and shiny sphere in the gold cloak's hand. It seemed to be made of dragon glass, and its function seemed to be very important. What use could a dragon glass ball have? Earl Montfort leaned over and introduced proudly, "Don't underestimate this dragon glass ball. Divine grace has endowed it with wonderful power, allowing it to record people's appearance and information. From now on, just use similar devices to check, and everything will be clearly visible." Brienne was silent. The gold cloak seemed to have discovered something from Montfort just now, and released him directly after exchanging the blessing eternal light. Because of that invisible divine grace? After entering the city, the team drove straight to the Red Keep. The further east they went, the more serious the pedestrians on the road became, the more empty the middle of the road became, and the more soldiers with swords and armor there were. In a riding journey of more than 10 minutes, Brienne encountered 5 inspections at various intersections, all with the black and shiny dragon glass ball as the protagonist. Even the taverns and bakeries on the roadside had soldiers holding dragon glass balls on duty. Earl Montfort proudly looked like he was looking at his own achievements. Escape divine grace? No travel, no buying bread and wine, and there are routine searches. The glory of the gods will be spread throughout the city. Brienne's premonition was getting worse and worse. Now it seemed that Earl Montfort's boasting was not all false. A knight walked out of the Red Keep. "His Majesty summons you." Chapter 106, The King Summons. A dazzling edict popped up on the divine grace light screen. "His Majesty summons you to the throne room. Secretariat." The 2 lines of text flashed incessantly in the center of his vision, forcing Loras to stop what he was doing and place the gold dust-covered brush back into the small box on the table. This was Loras's private residence. He was sitting alone in front of a mirror, tracing the Tyrell family's golden rose onto a shield-shaped badge. At this moment, the rose outline on the badge was complete, but only half of it had been painted with gold, the other half remaining a cold, silvery white. He longed to finish painting the badge in one go, allowing the golden rose to appear in its full glory, and to pray for the Southern Alliance. But the edict continued to flash, demanding attention. With a soft sigh, Loras set down the unfinished badge. The divine grace light screen did not allow for delay. Especially when the order came from the Secretariat. Although this institution only existed on the divine grace light screen, everyone knew that it was the mouthpiece of His Majesty the King. Loras stood up and saw himself in the mirror. The weather was hot and humid, and he was only wearing a thin shirt, which was not suitable for going out, let alone meeting the king. He summoned a servant, and Loras allowed himself to be wrapped layer upon layer in exquisite, formal, and heavy garments, just like his situation in the Red Keep, concealing his inner pain and passion deep within. He looked at himself in the mirror. The military uniform was neat and imposing, but it still felt like something was missing. That's right. Loras remembered that daily training and the instructional manual on the Divine Grace light screen required him to dress properly for important occasions, and not just in this way. Loras found several badges of various shapes. A bronze six-pointed star, symbolizing the grace of the seven gods, was the emblem of the Holy War Army, worn on the left chest, directly in front of the heart. A silver cast all-seeing eye, a silvery white triangle radiating light, symbolized the omnipresent light and was the emblem of the Order of Light, worn around the neck. A circular badge, with a swastika engraved, symbolized the summoning of the divine envoy and was the emblem of all those favored by divine grace, worn on the left arm. Was there more? Loras paused, trying to recall. What other identities do I have? Holy War Army soldier, member of the Order of Light, one favored by divine grace, Loras of House Tyrell, Knight of Flowers, Renly's lover. No, His Majesty Renly was already engaged to his sister Marjorie. At best, he could only be his knight. After hesitating again and again, Loras finally left behind the golden rose emblem and fastened a cloak with the crowned stag. For the king in his heart. Walking out of the room, Loras headed straight for the throne room along a familiar path. While walking quickly, greeting the courtiers and ladies along the way, Loras pondered the purpose of the king's summons. Today was Tuesday, so it shouldn't be about handing over divine grace creations. After receiving divine grace, Loras and the others quickly discovered that the intangible divine grace power could gradually grow and be separated through their own hands, entering various ordinary objects, thereby creating tools with miraculous effects. The light screen called them divine grace creations and issued a fixed task, to hand over 11 divine grace creations every Sunday. 11 was just right, slightly less than the divine grace power gained each week. Everyone's surplus from 2 weeks could be used to create another divine grace creation. The light screen would purchase them at a fair price, or they could be kept for personal use. Loras himself had kept a flame dagger made of dragon crystal, as he had heard that dragon crystal was most compatible with divine grace. Just 2 days ago, Loras had handed in his quota for last week, completing the light screen's task. The deadline for this week's task was still Sunday, so that couldn't be the reason for the summons. Perhaps it was to find some work for the idle Holy War Army? After all, they were too idle. Loras felt this deeply. In recent days, apart from the regular tasks assigned by the light screen every day, it seemed as if he had completely disappeared from the Red Keep and King's Landing. No other errands had come his way. This was originally a good thing, since his most important identity in the Red Keep was as a hostage of the Tyrell family, and he should be satisfied if he wasn't bothered. But as time passed, Loras watched the Red Keep change again and again, King's Landing alter again and again, the gold cloaks transform into divine grace favored guards, and the new recruits recruited by Sir Jaime rapidly transform, almost like a battle-hardened elite force. Every day, Loras's understanding was subverted, and his expectation of the Southern Alliance's victory was reduced by 1 point. The feeling of helplessness was too painful. Loras would rather immerse himself in the light screen's tasks, pouring out sweat and energy, and casting aside all heavy and complicated thoughts. The light screen required everyone to run 10,000 steps in the morning. Very well, Loras not only ran in the front, but also doubled his efforts. The light screen required training in swordsmanship, spearmanship, horsemanship, and the use of flame and healing. Loras went all out, squeezing out every bit of his strength and God-given flame, and achieving the top spot on the light screen leaderboard every day. The light screen required studying documents, history, and tactics. Loras not only carefully memorized the knowledge provided by the light screen, but also privately borrowed related books. In the weekly exams, besides Samuel Tarly, Loras was still the champion. Even so, the waking hours of each day were still too long. The light screen's tasks could only take up half the time at most, so what about the other half? Loras desperately needed more goals and more work to avoid meaningless melancholy and reverie. It should be about the Holy War Army, right? The more Loras thought about it, the more certain he became. The content on the Divine Grace light screen was very rich. There were detailed introductions and brief lists of the various departments under the throne, historical records of the families of the Seven Kingdoms and their current territories, titles, and members, as well as those favored by divine grace and the Holy War Army. Loras could see clearly that every week, the number of Holy War Army soldiers doubled, and the number of those favored by divine grace increased by hundreds or thousands. As of today, the Holy War Army already had 1,000 soldiers, and those favored by divine grace numbered more than 5,000. 1,000 Holy War Army soldiers, Although the power of flame and healing was limited, slow to recover, and could not be squandered recklessly, it was ultimately a divine power. Even in the midst of battle, stopping an army of 10,000 would not be a problem. And this number was not the limit. Wait another month or two. Now it seemed that the king had not forgotten this enormous power. Loras began to guess at the king's arrangements for him. He wouldn't ask me to fight against my family, would he? Loras walked into the throne room with trepidation. 2 rows of gold cloaks, no, guards, were solemnly guarding both sides of the hall. The king stood in front of the iron throne, withdrawing his blazing, light-infused sword dragon flame from the shoulder of a kneeling, tall figure. Rise! King's Guard, Brienne of Tarth. That name. Loras paused, staring fixedly at the tall figure's back, which seemed vaguely familiar. The newly appointed King's Guard rose and turned around. It was her. Loras was certain. That face was unforgettable, unique, beauty Brienne. Wasn't she His Majesty Renly's loyal admirer? Why was she here, and she had become Joffrey's King's Guard? The king beckoned him. Loras, come forward. The king was summoning. Loras approached step by step, a shocking guess forming in his mind. You know, Uncle Renly is bound to lose. The king concluded with a light laugh. After all, blood is thicker than water. I might spare his life if 2 King's Guard would advise mercy. Loras understood everything. For the king in his heart. He lowered his head, knelt on one knee, and offered his sword. Chapter 107, Grace and Authority, Power and Might. On this day, Joffrey successively knighted 30 members of the King's Guard. These included Rabar Royce, the second son of House Royce of Runestone, the second largest family in the Vale. Alan Mouton, the second son of House Mouton of Maidenpool, the main port in Crabs Bay under the Riverlands jurisdiction. Rosso Blount, a member of the Blount family of Crackclaw Point, descendants of the heroes of the peninsula, in the northeastern part of the Crownlands. Justin Massey, a member of House Massey, the most influential family at Massey's Hook in the southeastern Crownlands. And many sons of various lords with strong power or key territorial locations. These newly appointed King's Guard had all been granted the grace of God 2 or 3 weeks prior, training and learning under the guidance of the light screen as holy warriors. Now it seemed that the effects of the grace of God were excellent. Joffrey was not clear about the true thoughts in everyone's hearts, but the result was that everyone offered their loyalty and future to the throne, making solemn and inviolable oaths, and from then on became King's Guard bearing glory. The infamy of the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, would constantly warn these King's Guard that oath-breakers would be eternally plunged into the abyss. Moreover, there was the unlimited gaze of the grace of God light screen. Joffrey was full of confidence that the shackles on these people's bodies and minds were heavy enough, and would become increasingly strict, enough to extinguish any rebellious thoughts and turn them into true steel guards. Of course, their main use was not as guards, otherwise, with so many holy warriors, why specifically knight these people? What Joffrey valued was their family background. In the short term, these King's Guard could make the families behind them more inclined towards the throne, stabilize the vast nobility, and prevent the situation from becoming chaotic to the point of complete loss of control. After that, at the appropriate time, their bloodlines would play a crucial role in helping to centralize power. Order in chaos, fighting without breaking, this was in line with Joffrey's greatest interests. The reforms in the Seven Kingdoms had to be swift and powerful, but they could not cause too much damage. After all, this was Joffrey's own kingdom. Tens of millions of square kilometers of territory, tens of millions of people, this was his foundation for dominating the world, the original accumulation for building a magical golden age. If he could command them, he would not want to cause any loss at all. Reducing losses was also the main reason why he specifically increased the number of King's Guard positions. For the sake of authority, war was necessary, but it could not be completely antagonistic, constantly deepening hatred and plunging the Seven Kingdoms into endless internal strife. The lords and the throne needed to reach a new balance. Joffrey had made all the preparations. To those rebellious and stubborn, the steel sword in his right hand burned with fierce fire. To the subjects who obeyed the throne, the scepter in his left hand would share power and light. Fierce fire or holy light? He believed people would choose the right answer. For the new balance, the coronation ceremony was the initial signal, and so was the knighting of the King's Guard. In total, there were 77 King's Guard. Joffrey did not fill them all at once, and specifically reserved half of the positions for the lords of the southern three kingdoms. The Stormlands, the Reach, and Dorne, the three kingdoms together accounted for a small half of the territory and almost half of the population. This was a powerful and indispensable force that must be returned to the throne as completely as possible. Use overwhelming force to crush the lords' rebellion and arrogance, and then take them as dogs. This was Joffrey's response to Renly's rebellion. To this end, the throne's own strength must be strengthened as quickly as possible, and it cannot rely solely on the support of the Westerlands and other lords. Otherwise, even if the rebellion was quelled, it would only be another cycle of history, another struggle for the great lords to fight for position and line up, and people would not revere the power and might of the throne itself. The most fundamental power of the throne. King's Landing and the Crownlands must become the protagonists of the war and seize the most glorious victory. This was originally a slim hope. For hundreds of years, the Crownlands directly under the Iron Throne had a very low sense of existence, almost inferior to any kingdom. Its strength also matched its reputation. Joffrey used the treasury and magic to arm it, but it only supported 20 or 30,000 soldiers, and it was almost impossible to make ends meet. Such a Crownlands was of course not enough to demonstrate the authority of the throne. The kings of the past initially relied on dragons to flaunt their strength. After losing the dragons, they wooed the lords of the seven kingdoms and ruled the country by marriage and law. As a result, the lords naturally despised the throne itself even more. Whether the king's reverence was sincere depended entirely on how many lords supported the throne, how many friendly dukes there were, and the extent of the rule of benevolence. Joffrey was well aware of this. That's why he chose to focus on cleaning up King's Landing when Renly was massing his troops, in order to make a splash and completely reverse the lords' contempt for King's Landing and the Crownlands. Defeat an army of 100,000 with King's Landing's own 20,000 troops, and toll the death knell of the old era. Magic gave him the confidence to achieve this goal. So far, King's Landing already had more than 1,000 holy warriors, mages, with rune imprints, and could provide more than 1,000 units of runic energy every day. Joffrey worked tirelessly, collecting the runic energy accumulated by the holy warriors every Sunday for use in the following week. Part of the runic energy was used to bestow rune imprints, creating more holy warriors. Part was used to create various magical items, such as wishing stones, advanced grace cores, databases, all-seeing eyes, and books of the chosen. The wishing stones were engraved with rune imprints such as information, drawing source energy and converting it into information magic energy for the magic energy consumption of the grace cores, maintaining the operation of the magic network, Grace of God light screen. The database was another application of information runes. After editing specific instruction programs, they could store and retrieve information, thereby assisting in the updating and upgrading of the magic network, facilitating magic research and magic network operation. The advanced grace cores added various rune imprints, making them more stable and powerful, and eliminating the need to frequently visit the wishing stones. The all-seeing eye was the eye of the Security Bureau. Some eyes also added runes such as reconnaissance, positioning, and backtracking, which could not only monitor the grace blessed, but also rely on various media to obtain more extensive, secret, and distant intelligence. The Book of the Chosen can also be said to be a kind of database, specializing in storing and retrieving personnel information, making the soldiers' inspection work more rigorous and efficient, so as to better control King's Landing. There were many similar props, with Joffrey's own ideas and the inspiration of the research department. The endless stream of new inventions made him excited and tangled. The accumulation of runic energy was already considerable, but to manufacture so many kinds of props, it seemed not enough. How should the limited runic energy be allocated? Should he fully build the holy warriors? Or manufacture more wishing stones to expand the scale of the magic network? Or use it to create various magical items, experiment with ideas, and study the diversified application of magic? Each road had its own unique advantages. The power of the holy warriors, the expansion of the magic network, and the research and application of magic really made him difficult to give up, looking left and right. Joffrey could only judge the situation himself, doubling the number of holy warriors every week, manufacturing 100 wishing stones, and supplying the remaining runic energy to other props or storing it for future needs. In short, King's Landing was growing day by day, and magic was changing the world day by day. He was very satisfied. Chapter 108. Sparrow. The King's Road south of the Neck has a Windwater River, which flows from south to north into Blackwater Bay. Near the estuary on the east bank of the Windwater River lies an unremarkable village called Strand, where over 300 villagers live by fishing and farming, paying taxes on time to the knights sent by the Molester family, and their days are stable and peaceful. 14-year-old Quell, however, is not content to stay in the village his whole life. Sitting on a wrinkled and scarred rock at the top of the cliff, facing the white, churning waves below, Quell puffed out his chest and boasted. "One day, I will wear bright, shiny armor, ride a fine horse that has never plowed a field or carried wheat, and wield a steel sword forged in a castle, and become a top-notch knight." He turned his head, his eyes fixed on the girl beside him. "I won't be like Sir John, just riding around collecting rents and extorting coppers from us poor folk. When the war comes, I will go to the battlefield and fight with real swords and spears, and be a true knight." Quell's face flushed slightly, but his dark skin concealed the change. "To my mind, only a true knight deserves a girl like you, Jane. What a beautiful name, just like the Jane in the stories, the one from Stonehenge." The sea breeze was strong, and Jane kept combing her long brown hair with her fingers, only smiling. Quell stared dreamily at the girl in his heart. In the entire village, Jane was the most sought-after girl. Boys in their teens and 20s, even married men, took extra care of her. Her every smile, every movement was so charming, bringing the most beautiful colors to the drab village, giving the boys the most beautiful dreams, waking up full of energy every day. Quell was most proud of being able to ask Jane out alone, which was unique. Although Jane hadn't agreed to his courtship, just sitting here watching the girl of his dreams, occasionally having her fluttering brown hair brush against his cheek or nose, was enough to make him happy for a whole week. Quell was very confident. Jane's father had said that only a knight deserved his beloved daughter, and whoever became a knight first would marry Jane. The other boys in the village were cowards, usually going out to sea to fish or working in the fields with the adults, only knowing how to cast nets and drive plough horses, and they wouldn't dare to fight with swords. Knights? They wouldn't even dare to think about it. Although Quell himself was almost the same, he already had a plan. Now was a good opportunity. Lord Renly of the Stormlands had betrayed the king in King's Landing and was gathering men to seize the Iron Throne. The king would definitely need many, many men. Quell had decided that in a few days he would go north to King's Landing to serve the king. The king was the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and would surely win against Lord Renly in the south. When the time came to fight a few good battles, and he himself would cut off a few heads, becoming a knight would be simple. Weren't so many stories like this? The Battle of the Ruby Ford, the Battle of Summer Hall, the Dance of the Dragons, the Rage Fire, how many people became famous in them, how many legends have been passed down since then. Anyway, no one cared about him, and his uncle, who took the best care of him, had gone to sea with a large ship a few days ago, and probably wouldn't be back for a long time. He only needed to bring some dry food, and he could leave at any time. Quell had told everyone about his decision, hoping to gain a few companions and let people see how brave he was. Unfortunately, neither of these goals was achieved. The adults had no interest at all, even laughing and looking contemptuous, and a few of his friends were moved, but they were dragged back by their parents with beatings and scoldings. Quell was very puzzled. Everyone's reaction to the war seemed different from the stories. Especially the older people. Upon hearing that Lord Renly had rebelled, the old men in the village were terrified, looking out of the village all day long, asking every passerby and merchant for news, as if they were afraid of being attacked by the army. How could the army possibly look at a small place like Strand? Quell was very sure. Strand was so inconspicuous, only interacting with a few neighboring villages and towns. The passing merchants were full of sorrow, often complaining that they had come to the wrong place, unable to collect any special products, and unable to sell their goods. Although Quell himself had never been to many distant places, he was already tired of everything in Strand. It was too quiet here, like a fish tank, the surface of the water without any ripples, and when you got close to it, it was fishy and smelly, the fish underneath lying half dead at the bottom of the water, without any thoughts, just waiting to be taken out and killed. Besides, he couldn't even become such a fish. Quell didn't understand many things, but he knew that an orphan without the support of adults couldn't live in peace in the village. Quell didn't have farmland, didn't have a fishing boat, and didn't have a proper job. The villagers were all working hard to fill their stomachs, who would hire someone to work? Only big places had a place for people like him. But he hadn't had the opportunity before, and could only hang around in the village. Without coppers, he could only wander around the beach all day, picking up some odd shells, crabs, and small fish, and then go to various families in the village to mooch a fire to cook his ingredients. If he really had no food to eat, he would stay at his uncle's house for a few days, enduring the difficulties of that woman who never had a good face, which was also unavoidable. These days were too difficult to endure. Fortunately, there was Jane in the cold village. Quell quietly moved his buttocks, so that he was closer to the girl he loved, a little closer. Jane didn't dislike him as an orphan, her smile was his greatest comfort these years, allowing him to persist in living until now. Even if only for her, Quell must become a knight. Jane finally spoke, "The wind is getting stronger, I should go back, my mother still has something for me to help with." Quell quickly stood up, "I'll take you." Quell lived in an abandoned hut on the edge of the cliff, but he always insisted on sending Jane home, one of the dozens of houses in the village below, lively, with a barn, a fish tank, and no drafts. Seeing the combination of Quell and Jane, the people along the way smiled and giggled annoyingly, even shouting something like "True Knight, pure Jane." Quell never paid attention to these. When they arrived at the house in front of Jane's house, a tall, thin figure slowly walked out of the door. He turned to look at Quell, his eyes very cold and firm, as if he was not looking at a person, but at something else. Quell knew him. This grey-haired old man wearing an old wool robe was a wandering Septan and had been in the village for several days. Many children had restarted their formal names with this old man, and some had come to confess their sins and ask for forgiveness. Septans also officiated weddings. Quell had thought about his wonderful wedding scene with Jane, but at that time, this Septan would probably have already left. Quell was very strange. The old Septan gave people so many names, but only allowed people to call him Sparrow. Sparrow, what a simple and ordinary word. Buzz. Suddenly, a chaotic sound arose at the entrance of the village. Quell raised his head. Sparrow prayed piously, "Mother, have mercy, bless this village, at least bless this one." Quell looked at Sparrow in confusion, wondering why he was like this. Chapter 109. It was evening, and most of the residents of Strand village had returned to the village, ready to enjoy dinner and rest after a hard day's work. Without warning, everything happened so suddenly. Several hundred knights forcefully charged into this village built of stone and wood. At this time, the fence surrounding the village not only failed to stop the threat but became the biggest obstacle for the villagers to escape. After several of the fastest people were intercepted by the knights and whipped into a bloody mess with the knights' lances or leather whips, no one dared to approach the fence anymore. After a brief period of chaos, the villagers were gathered into a pile, listening in fear and bewilderment to the only loud voice. "In the name of Andals, the Roiner, and the First Men, King of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, Renly of House Baratheon, I hereby deliver this decree to all subjects. Joffrey Waters, the false king who usurped the Iron Throne, is the product of incest between Queen Cersei and her brother Sir Jaime Lannister, and conspired with the Lannister family to murder King Robert and Duke Stannis. His actions are against morality, arbitrary and reckless, belittling nobles, and harming the common people. His sins are unforgivable. The truth has been revealed, yet he remains unrepentant, falsely claiming to be king, greedy for power and position. The Seven Kingdoms have risen up in response, forming a mighty army of 100,000, which will soon set out to reach King's Landing and overthrow the false king's tyranny. In order to correct the laws and enforce justice, a military levy is hereby imposed on the subjects of the Crownlands, and no one may disobey." The speaker was a knight in shining armor, but he wasn't wearing a helmet. Quell quietly raised his gaze. The knight had black hair and dark, rough skin, but it didn't seem to be from the sea breeze. Beneath the black-haired knight was a tall, sturdy, pure black horse, such a beautiful horse, the kind Quell dreamed of owning, the mount of a true knight. The black-haired knight held a kite-shaped wooden shield in his left hand, painted with gold lacquer, with a black stag stepping proudly in the middle. Other than that, there were no other symbols or patterns. A black stag, that seemed to be the king's emblem, or was it King Renly's? The black-haired knight held a dark red cloth bag in his right hand, he shook it, and a furry ball fell out of the bag, rolling a few circles on the muddy ground. Quell looked at it a few times, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat, his mind went blank. The surrounding villagers screamed and fled backward, as if afraid that the thing on the ground would come alive. It was a human head. The black-haired knight moved his horse a few steps, stomping the head on the ground into the mud. House Mallory disobeyed the decree and blindly swore allegiance to the false king, so all its titles, territories, and subjects are deprived, and all the knights under its command have been brought to justice, and the knight worshipped by your village is no exception. Quell stared blankly at the human face in the mud, his expression deathly stiff, his eyes dry and dull, but it was indeed Old John. What was Old John's last name? Quell couldn't remember, but he was a knight, and his fief was Strand village, so he must have a last name. But now, it didn't matter anymore. Old John had a wife and 2 daughters, but no sons. Women couldn't be knights, so Strand village would only be given to a new knight. Quell, Jenny, and many others looked at the black-haired knight. Would this person be the new knight? Would he even live in Lord Mallory's castle? Would Lord Rosa Mallory fight back? The Lord had always lived in King's Landing, serving the king on the Iron Throne, and he would definitely do something if he knew what had happened here. But, several hundred steel-clad knights were many times more powerful than Lord Mallory. King Renly had an army of 100,000? How many knights would that be? Could it be that the king would be defeated, and King Renly would be the new king? Quell hesitated. Maybe I should join King Renly's command? No, King Renly. The black-haired knight dismounted. Tonight, I will stay in your village. Serve us well, provide military supplies, and obey King Renly's rule, and your past sins may be forgiven. Then hundreds of knights also dismounted, put down their shields, took off their helmets, asking people to feed their horses, asking people to prepare food and beds, asking people to do this and that. The atmosphere in the village immediately became a lot more relaxed. Everyone became busy again. Working after a day of labor was naturally tiring, but it was a reassuring kind of tiredness. At least it proved that the knights still needed everyone, so they wouldn't be killed at will. Although it seemed like they would lose a lot of property, it was better than nothing. After all, this was war, facing hundreds of powerful knights. What more could they ask for other than to stay alive? Quell wanted to follow Janny and protect his sweetheart, but he was called away by a knight to move wheat and cured meat from the village warehouse to the carts brought by the knights, and he wasn't released until dark. Looking at the heavy carts, Quell's desire to join the army grew stronger. So much food, enough to eat for how many years? Thinking about how he was hungry all the time, and the villagers looked on coldly, never willing to give him a full meal, and then looking at today, the knights only said a few words, and the village obediently sent out the entire warehouse. How satisfying! Perhaps it was God's blessing. Quell suddenly saw 2 familiar faces, Base and Beck from the neighboring village, who were also orphans. Although Base and Beck weren't wearing armor, they were holding lances and shields, and even wearing robes with the black stag, walking on the village path with smug faces, as if they were the owners of the village. Quell's hope became stronger. He went over, said a few flattering words, and finally stated his intention. Quell had never said a soft word before, and the 2 seemed to enjoy it especially, immediately patted their chests and took Quell to find the captain, the black-haired knight. Finally, Quell was taken to Janny's house. The captain and several knights were enjoying dinner, the freshest stewed fish, grilled fish, and barley soup, and Janny's family was accompanying them. Quell had only taken a few steps closer when he heard Janny's father say, "Sir, it's cold at night, let my little girl warm your bed tonight. It's a small contribution to King Renly." Quell's mind immediately buzzed, his footsteps rooted to the ground, his eyes involuntarily going to Janny. Janny lowered her head and said nothing. "Refuse. Janny, don't give in, don't be afraid, he's not a real knight." Quell roared frantically in his heart. The black-haired man put down his knife and fork and looked at Janny. "Are you a virgin?" Quell almost pounced on him. Even without swords, he would tear his throat with his teeth. But a familiar, sweet voice sounded softly, "Please forgive me, sir, Janny was once ignorant." Quell swallowed. What did that mean? The black-haired captain smiled. "I'm not interested in used goods." "But, the young men don't mind, do they?" The knights next to him chuckled. One of them put down his soup bowl. "Captain, I'm full." "Brothers, I'll go first and test the goods for you, haha. Only 7 or 8 steps away." Quell watched helplessly as this man brazenly put his arms around his Janny, his laughter harsh and unpleasant, his hands restlessly groping around, gradually moving to the inner room. Janny's trembling cries came from the inner room. The black-haired captain said lightly, sweet as a song. Chapter 110, Quill watched all night. What are you doing bringing him here? The black-haired captain finally spoke, addressing the three standing at the door. Base listened with excitement and agitation to the inflammatory sounds coming from the inner room, while also looking at Quill with some hesitation. He knew what Quill thought of Jenny. Quill actually dreamed of marrying her. Base often laughed at this. But it was no wonder, she was so pure in front of Quill. Thinking of Quill's arrogant face, Base felt very proud every time he pinned Jenny down. Base occasionally felt uneasy. What if, one day, Quill found out the truth, what would he do? What could he do? But that was all in the past. Base looked at the captain. Now, the captain, who commanded the brigade of knights, was the only master of Beachhead Village, and Quill's fists and determination were no longer worth mentioning. So Base respectfully replied, Sir, this Quill wants to join us, what do you think? The captain looked at Quill's bloodshot, trembling eyes, you also want to serve His Majesty Lanley? What skills do you have? The captain seemed completely unconcerned about Quill's abnormal state. Quill couldn't respond at all. The continuous, sweet cries filled his entire mind, as if the sounds coming from all directions and infinite distances had a mysterious magic, shattering his soul. He closed his eyes and opened them again, closed them and opened them again, the vision was still blurred and distorted, dizzying, like a nightmare. Unfortunately, his heart ached as if it were being twisted by a knife, the pounding heartbeat echoed throughout the world, and the blood all over his body flowed faster and faster, rushing to his face, bringing real, intense pain and heat. He wished this was just a nightmare. But why could he still think? Could still judge that this was the dark, seven-layered hellish reality? The man in the inner room actually dared to shout. What right did he have to make a sound? To shatter Jenny's elegy? To let the cold, piercing truth rush towards him? Quill remembered Jenny's figure a moment ago, she said softly with her head lowered, Please forgive me, sir, Jenny was once, ignorant. Ignorant? Ignorant? Quill also remembered the ridicule of the people in the village, the true knight, the pure Jenny. The truth was right in front of him. They didn't think I was a true knight, so, how pure was Jenny? It turned out that I had been dreaming all along. It turned out that everything was my delusion. Night, wedding, war, story, all go to hell. I don't believe it anymore. Jenny of Arostone City? Did such a girl really exist? Jenny. Jenny's smile seemed to be still in front of him. Quill was puzzled. Why could such a Jenny smile so purely, like a maiden in a sanctuary, gently smiling to save the world from despair and pain? Was she like this to everyone else? Not with a smile, but with herself. The sound became louder and louder, faster and faster, more and more intense, the wood creaking. It inexplicably reminded people of the bursting tide. Quill closed his eyes tightly, covering his ears with his hands, and faint screams, heartbeats, gnashing of teeth, and muffled buzzing filled him. There was also a bitter, salty and metallic taste in his mouth, as if he was eating the most disgusting, rotten raw fish. A great force suddenly hit Quill's waist, and he flew back several steps, instinctively arching his body and twitching slightly, like a dying shrimp. You bastard! The captain is talking to you. Letting the saliva flow from his mouth, Quill blankly raised his head and looked at the black-haired man. The captain sighed slightly, seeming to know everything. Forget it, he's also a pitiful person, completely played by a bitch, it's normal to be unable to think straight for a while. Bitch! Quill felt that he should loudly refute, wave his fist, but he just couldn't muster the strength. Bitch! Wasn't this the truth? The captain walked up to him and squatted down unguardedly. How about it, do you want to take revenge? I'll make the decision, you can go second. Bitch! Quill tilted his neck. Jenny's father and mother were standing in the corner, seemingly not angry at all, like two wooden sculptures. Yes, they all knew. Quill remembered Jenny's father's promise, whoever became a knight first, he would marry Jenny to him. How ridiculous! Quill was still silent. The captain got up and walked away indifferently. Don't bother with him, this kind of guy is not worthy to fight for His Majesty Lanley. Besides, it'll be over tomorrow. Everyone then ignored Quill, letting him lie in the corner. All night long, the candle light did not go out. The sounds in the inner room continued, with figures coming in and out one after another. Quill was very awake. He didn't think about anything, but he saw all the scenes and remembered them in his mind. A total of 19 knights had entered the inner room. The knights were very relaxed, and when they came out, they were not only not wearing armor, but some were not even wearing outer clothes and robes. Quill saw the badges on their bodies, a reclining black lion, a white crescent moon above the forest, 3 golden buckles, a group of blackbirds on a yellow background. Base and Beck had been inside, and they smiled at him when they came out, before going out to patrol the night. The sky finally brightened. Jenny still hadn't come out of the room, but the knights gathered everyone again in the open space at the entrance of the village, including Quill. The knights put on their armor, raised their shields, and took up their steel swords and spears, some even riding war horses. The villagers panicked again. Quill looked expressionlessly and silently at the wandering monk Sparrow, remembering Sparrow's prayer yesterday. The knights didn't take any further action, and everyone had to wait anxiously. The sun gradually rose. A caravan appeared outside the village, with mules and donkeys pulling carts, some loaded with goods, and some empty. The captain on the black horse waved his hand, and the knights carried 2 frames and placed them heavily on the ground. The frames were covered with grey cloth, bulging underneath, vaguely showing the shape of human bodies, and everyone had an ominous premonition. The knights lifted the grey cloth. Many people immediately exclaimed, or shook their heads and sighed, and the old people showed fear. Quill recognized the corpses on the ground, Base and Beck. Both of them had frightening gashes on their necks, and the dried, dark red blood looked like branches growing out of their necks, covering their faces, necks, and chests menacingly. The captain spoke, his voice filled with anger. Both of these men were loyal soldiers of His Majesty Lanley, but after only staying in your village for 1 night, 2 living people turned into cold corpses. It seems you are still unrepentant. Quill coldly watched the black-haired captain continue his impassioned speech, while the monk Sparrow and the people in the village were doing their best to defend themselves. But to no avail. The knights and the people from the caravan moved out all the grain, tools, livestock, and wealth. Then they destroyed the fishing nets, fishing rods, and fishing boats in the water. Finally, they set the entire village on fire. Quill was brought before the captain, who looked at the burning village and said with a smile, "Sweet as a song." At this moment, the captain drew his steel sword and cut off Quill's right arm. Chapter 111, The First Strike of the Rebels. Sweet as song. That's the motto of House Karen of Night Song. Your Grace, they are so brazen, not even bothering to conceal it. Baron Roshby Mallister denounced them with a face full of resentment. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but the King's Guard assigned to guard the Iron Throne were Loras Tyrell and Brienne Tarth. As King's Guard, they had to remain silent and focus on guarding the king. Joffrey sat quietly on the Iron Throne, looking down at the crowd below seeking justice. Besides Baron Roshby Mallister, the other 2 standing were Earl Joshua Mouton and Earl Tristan Massey, with a large group of grey-faced and miserable commoners kneeling behind them. "You," Baron Roshby Mallister said, turning to a one-armed young man, "tell everything you know, don't be afraid, and report to His Grace truthfully." The ministers at the council table and the courtiers on both sides looked at the young man. The one-armed young man's face was numb, and his words were devoid of emotion. There were hundreds of them, all wearing armor and carrying shields with the black stag, coming to Salt Pans to announce Renly's decree, and they even brought old John's head. Baron Roshby Mallister added, "John Bywater was a knight I knighted, and his fief was Salt Pans." The one-armed young man continued, "They first demanded half of the village's grain reserves, then stayed for a night. The next day, 2 of them died, so they burned the entire village. The black-haired captain said sweet as song and chopped off my right hand." A fisherman next to him chimed in, "It's not just that, they also took all the valuables, every grain of food, and destroyed everyone's boats and fishing nets." A farmer with a face full of ravines wailed, "Those people are completely beasts. My poor daughter, only 14 years old, was defiled by them all night, and in the end, those guys forcibly took her away. Who knows if she's dead or alive now?" The courtiers on both sides sighed incessantly. Baron Roshby Mallister also said, "The 2 who died were villagers from Hayford, which is also my territory. It was burnt down on the same day as Salt Pans. Other towns and villages have also suffered one after another, which shows that they originally had this vicious plan." Another farmer said, "I am from Hayford." After the black-haired people left, hundreds more people came, led by a red-haired man. The red-haired man's subordinates also died, and then the entire village was destroyed. I saw it with my own eyes, an old man said, his beard trembling excitedly. Those cavalry and caravans all came from the south. The caravans brought many empty wagons, just to load our lifetime of belongings. The people in the caravans even paid the cavalry directly. It's worse than bandits. We have lost everything, so we have to come to King's Landing to ask for His Grace's protection. Joffrey looked at Baron Roshby Mallister, who was standing at the front and speaking the most. House Mallister, a small lord on the east bank of the Windwater, whose territory is close to the Kingswood and Blackwater Bay, has barren land, declining commerce, insignificant strategic position, and no important role. But Baron Roshby Mallister's performance was very loyal. Not only has he stayed in the court to serve for many years, but he also responded positively when Renly rebelled and the throne summoned vassals, contributing 20 knights and 100 infantrymen to the army. The number is not large, but it is already most of the power within the Mallister territory. In terms of both emotion and reason, the throne cannot ignore the encounters within its territory. Joffrey then looked at the two people slightly behind him, Earl Joshua Mouton and Earl Tristan Massey. House Mouton is the largest lord along the Windwater, with territory south of House Mallister. Although it is not the liege lord of House Mallister, it obviously retains great influence over it. Earl Joshua Mouton has not said a word so far. Baron Roshby Mallister added, they are still heading north, towards Massey's Hook. The northeast of the Windwater is the narrow Massey's Hook, which surrounds half of Blackwater Bay from south to north, choking a key waterway to King's Landing. But without a strong navy, Massey's Hook is just a burden. But House Massey obviously did not relax because of this. Earl Tristan Massey personally sailed to King's Landing to petition with other lords. Earl Mouton, Joffrey finally spoke, what is the situation in your territory? Joshua Mouton saluted respectfully. The rebels used similar methods. At first, they used a few heads to frame various towns and villages, and then they saved even this cost, directly declaring everyone in my territory to be rebels, destroying everything, and only leaving people's lives. Joshua Mouton pointed behind him, Your Grace, most of the people here have escaped from my jurisdiction. Joffrey asked in a deep voice, what is your suggestion? Joshua Mouton was still respectful and calm. Now that the war is urgent, all actions must be cautious, and I dare not ask for anything. I only hope that after the victory, those who do evil can receive the punishment they deserve. What beautiful and thoughtful words! Joffrey almost thought it was true. Earl Massey, what do you think? Tristan Massey looked indignant. House Massey and its subjects are willing to make some sacrifices, taking the overall situation as the most important thing. Massey's Hook is insignificant. If it disperses our strength and affects the war, that would be a great crime. Not a single word of truth. Joffrey separated his mind and entered the online small council meeting in the light screen, secretly discussing with a group of ministers. Lord Commander of the King's Guard Eric Cargyle gave the information. Renly's rebel army has been assembled. 10,000 cavalry and 20,000 infantry are stationed in Highgarden in Western Reach, with Earl Mathis Rowan as the commander, confronting the Rock. 10,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry gathered at Bitterbridge in the Eastern Reach, with Earl Randall Tarley as the vanguard and Duke Mace Tyrell as the commander, harassing the Gold Road while clearing supply routes. According to reliable information, the Bitterbridge rebels intend to go directly north, cross the Blackwater Rush upstream, detour through the Riverlands, and attack King's Landing from the land north of the Blackwater Rush. 7,000 and 10,000 infantrymen were gathered at Haystack Hall and Bronzegate in the northern Stormlands and eastern Kingswood, respectively. 5,000 cavalry are heading north along the King's Road from Storm's End and will soon arrive at Bronzegate. After introducing the general background, Eric's tone became more serious. Another 2,000 cavalrymen invaded the Crownlands, burning, killing, and looting along the Windwater, driving away civilians. The main participants include House Cairn of Nightsong, House Buckler of Bronzegate, House Fell of Fellwood, and House Grandison of Grandview. The knights of each family concealed it slightly, but still wore their family crests. It is suspected of being intentional provocation. The rebels' destruction is very thorough. As of this morning, more than 52,000 refugees have poured into King's Landing. It is estimated that nearly 200,000 more are fleeing to various parts of the Crownlands or are on their way to King's Landing. Now, the rebels have entered Massey's Hook. Most of the Crownlands forces are concentrated in King's Landing. Facing 2,000 cavalry and reinforcements, Massey's Hook's defense force is insufficient, and more than 300,000 people under its jurisdiction. Auric abruptly ended his speech. The ministers all understood the current situation and fell into deep thought. There is only one question. What does His Grace the King behind Auric want to do? Chapter 112. The events at Wendwater Bridge had occurred 2 weeks prior, and of course, Joffrey and Island's network of spies would not have missed it. In fact, today's petition was not a beginning, but the final conclusion. However, before announcing the answer, Joffrey wanted to hear the minister's opinions again. Tyrion, what do you think? Inside the white virtual space, Joffrey looked at Tyrion, who had transformed into a normal human height. With the power of magic, the online small council was almost like another world. With a thought, one could control the projections here to make various actions and reactions, while still being able to continue activities in reality, essentially possessing two bodies that did not interfere with each other. Tyrion, having been called upon, felt helpless. Although he knew that the king had certainly made a decision, and it was almost impossible to change it, he could only control the projection to speak. Wendwater Bridge and Massey's Hook are not essential locations to fight over. Renly, disregarding his past reputation for benevolence, had his men commit such acts, indicating that he must have significant schemes. In reality, Joffrey looked at the crowd below, his face serious in thought. Indeed, before this, everyone thought Renly would strike directly at King's Landing. Lord Massey and Lord Wendwater probably never imagined that their territories would be completely destroyed. Tyrion continued, Renly's move seems intended to lure our army south. After all, his fleet is weak, and the Blackwater Rush is an unavoidable obstacle for the southern rebels. Once a battle starts in the south, it will undoubtedly be more advantageous to the rebels, who have a large number of land troops. Very reasonable, the ministers pondered. Tyrion manipulated the light screen, projecting a three-dimensional, exquisite map onto the floor of the white space. Please look, everyone. If our army were to go south to support Massey's Hook, not only would the Kingswood be vast and difficult to traverse, making it prone to ambushes, but Renly's troops stationed at Bronze Gate and Haystack Hall are also not far away, and could reach Wendwater Bridge in a day, cutting off our army's retreat. Tyrion pointed to the Bitter Bridge further west. If the cavalry were to advance at full speed, it would only take 4 or 5 days to reach the Kingswood from Bitter Bridge, a week for elite infantry, and 2 weeks for peasant soldiers. If our army were to get entangled at Massey's Hook, and the rebel army from Bitter Bridge were to arrive, sealing off Wendwater Bridge and the Kingswood. By then, Wendwater Bridge, Haystack Hall, Harvest Hall, and Blackwater Bay would surround our army around Massey's Hook, like a gradually tightening noose. Why would we want to walk into it? Even if we retreat back to King's Landing before the rebel army from Bitter Bridge arrives, it would still affect morale to some extent, wasting energy in vain. Moreover, Wendwater Bridge was already a ruin. Even if they immediately supported Massey's Hook, it would be too late by the time they arrived. At most they could only gain hundreds of thousands of hungry mouths, and these wouldn't need to be taken by force. Renly would send them to their doorstep himself. Tyrion drew a circle around the Kingswood. Renly can only wreak havoc on this area. Wendwater Bridge and Massey's Hook are beyond saving. The Kingswood is sparsely populated, and the rest of the Crownlands are under the protection of King's Landing, so the rebels cannot repeat their trick. Tyrion summarized. This is a very obvious trap, and there will be no further losses. We should not rashly go south, it's best to defend King's Landing. Can the rebels keep lingering in the south forever? As for the petitioning lords, they would have to be compensated after the victory, according to their own requests. At the small council's table in the throne room, Tyrion expressed with admiration, Lord Wendwater, Lord Massey, you two are truly models of nobility, willing to sacrifice personal interests for the sake of the country's overall situation. I sincerely admire you. In the white space in the throne room, Joffrey remained silent. Sir Jaime Lannister, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, objected in the white space, Renly is burning, killing, and looting within the Crownlands, how can we turn a blind eye? The number of rebels is indeed large, but that's all they have. Jaime had great confidence in the power of King's Landing. Massey's Hook is indeed dangerous for ordinary armies. But the holy warriors created by the grace of the gods are no ordinary troops. The balance of war has completely changed. In these days, Jaime had personally experienced the power of the grace of the gods. With just a few thousand holy warriors, Renly's army will immediately disintegrate, like Aegon the Conqueror's field of fire. In fact, Tyrion also felt this deeply. The power of magic was spreading too quickly, unfathomable, leaving people only in awe. But to what extent could it achieve? How does it compare to Aegon's dragons? Tyrion chose to give the most cautious answer. If the effect of magic was indeed unparalleled, then defending King's Landing would still not cause any hindrance to victory. If the effect was not as expected, defending King's Landing would still be the least bad decision. The Hound was convinced of the power of magic. Renly's swords are not worth mentioning. Give me 500 holy warriors, and I guarantee that none of the bastards at Massey's Hook will escape. The Stormland rebels won't be able to stop us either. Grand Maester Hannah raised a new issue. What should we do with the refugees entering King's Landing? The current food supply can only support 500,000 to 600,000 people. If this continues, the Red Keep's granaries will have to be opened. Hannah, who was in charge of the logistics department, had become the minister most concerned about food. Island said, why not check the city gates more strictly, let the refugees outside go further north to make a living, and arrange jobs for the refugees inside the city? Doesn't the engineering bureau need people? Tyrion waved his hand. No, the engineering bureau already has enough people. They've recruited 20,000 people now, definitely enough. Joffrey finally asked, has the eastern half of the city not been cleared yet? Today was already August 10th, and the second round of clearing work in King's Landing had ended a few days ago, clearing out many more suspicious people and properties. But it was still not enough to compensate for half of King's Landing. Tyrion had been worried about this task for a long time, almost to the point of wanting to quit. Unfortunately, this thought could only be a thought. Your Majesty, it will still take some time. Tyrion could only admit the current situation. War can break out at any time. The gold dragons in the treasury cannot be easily used. I can only try to exchange industries and promises for the eastern half of the city, but this method is obviously not useful for everyone. Tyrion could understand those people's feelings. Abandoning the industry they rely on for a living or the homes of generations, even bright gold dragons may not satisfy everyone, let alone another unfamiliar house or empty promises. But would the willful king tolerate their resistance? Joffrey pondered silently. Tyrion acted cautiously. Island and Hannah performed their duties, Jaime and the Hound advocated attacking, and Grand Maester Pycelle remained silent. And there was the dragging eastern half of the city. Joffrey stood up from the Iron Throne. Everyone in the throne room instantly quieted down, paying attention to the king. Joffrey looked to the courtiers on the left. Lord Beric Dondarrion, give you 200 holy warriors, depart tomorrow to Massey's Hook, punish the thugs, enforce the law, and spread justice. Joffrey looked to the right again. Thuras of Myr, you will assist him. Thuras of Myr, the Red Priest of the Lord of Light, and Lord Dondarrion of Blackhaven, the same combination, different circumstances. Will the power of the Lord of Light to resurrect the dead appear again? Chapter 113, The New Throne Room. The king had made his judgment. Lord Beric Dondarrion and the Red Priest Thuras immediately accepted the order. Many courtiers gladly agreed. The members of the small council had no objections, and the petitioning commoners looked to their lords. Baron Mullister had already retreated behind the two earls at some point. Earl Macy frowned slightly. Earl Went was filled with gratitude. Your Majesty has dispatched the divinely blessed Holy War Army, and with such an upright and wise man as Lord Dondarrion leading them, the rebels' evil deeds will surely be judged, and the people of Massey's Hook will no longer suffer disaster. Divinely blessed. Thinking of the various miraculous changes he had seen in King's Landing these past 2 days, Earl Macy relaxed his expression and bowed to express his gratitude. Earl Macy and the other two returned to the ranks of the courtiers, and the people kneeling on the ground staggered as they left the throne room. The middle of the hall became empty again. When would the next petitioning group be summoned? The herald looked at His Majesty on the throne, waiting for any subtle signal. Joffrey had no intention of staying any longer. The requests of the petitioning groups behind them had already been presented in advance, all trivial and boring things, not worth wasting precious time on. In fact, with the help of the God's Grace Light Curtains communication, King's Landing had already initially realized the informatization of government affairs. Except for major events and the petitions of commoners who had not yet been shrouded by God's grace, Joffrey no longer needed to sit on the Iron Throne to issue orders. Viserys Targaryen entered from outside the hall, knelt in the middle of the hall, and pleaded guilty in a trembling voice, Your Majesty, I have been negligent in my care. Your mount has suddenly fallen ill, and has not eaten since this morning, lying motionless, and it looks like. The courtiers tried their best to maintain a calm expression. The white stag is sick, This reason had already been used 3 times, and there were several other explanations as well. You must know that the king does not come to the throne room to handle government affairs every day. Joffrey stood up. How could this happen again? You are too careless. Viserys only kowtowed and begged for forgiveness. Joffrey sighed and walked down the throne step by step. The white stag is a good omen bestowed by the gods. I am really worried. Mother, please handle state affairs on my behalf. The Queen Mother Cersei glared at her son with doting helplessness. As regent, although she usually sat on the Iron Throne to make judgments, there was not a single real major event among them, all ordinary and trivial disputes, extremely boring. If her son didn't often please her with smiles and gifts, Cersei would have long since stopped wanting to sit on this cold Iron Throne. After all, the current reality is that the regent's power is just a formality. Not only Cersei herself knew this, but all the courtiers, and even the servants and laborers of the Red Keep, saw it very clearly. The God's Grace light curtain had almost completely replaced the position of the throne room. Compared with the almost instantaneous transmission of instructions on the light curtain, the large-scale petitioning activities seemed cumbersome and protracted, and simply should not exist. Similar situations also existed for legal trials, personnel transfers, material applications, and so on. Without a doubt, when the God's grace shines upon the world, all systems and rules will be extremely fragile and will be overthrown at any time. At that time, His Majesty, who controls God's grace, will wield supreme power, and no one will be able to shake it. Everyone in the throne room watched the king leave, and the light curtain in their field of vision was still reminding them who was the master of King's Landing and the 7 kingdoms. If Regent Tywin were still in King's Landing, what would happen? Some people couldn't help but wonder. Walking on the road, Joffrey's mind entered the white space again. He looked around. All the projections of people had been removed, leaving only the vast white world, which had a wonderful charm, but it was inevitably boring and monotonous after looking at it for a long time. That's good. The new throne room has been designed, it's time to show it off. With a thought from Joffrey, the whiteness of the space immediately split into countless light particles, and then gradually combined and condensed, and dyed with new colors. The throne room in the illusion was thus formed. This was a magnificent domed hall, 200 jong high, and the circular hall was exactly 1000 jong in diameter, and the white inner walls were carved with intricate pillars, statues, symbols, and crests. Above the transparent dome appeared a clear starry sky. The moon palace and the 7 holy stars sprinkled silver light, which converged into the shining, holy, square, towering, and strangely patterned throne. He, transformed into 100 jong giant, sat on the throne. Just right. He looked down with satisfaction. In front of him was a sunken pool, and the pale blue sea water surrounded a model of the continent of Westeros, about the same size as his own body. On the map, small mountains and rivers crisscrossed, and white lines divided the boundaries of the lord's territories, and red, blue, and black light spheres represented the castles of hostile, friendly, and neutral lords. Several chairs were placed on each side of the map, a full 2 jong high, but they were no more conspicuous than any of the surrounding facilities. Joffrey summoned the members of the small council. So, several projections appeared one after another on the chairs next to the map, each 1 jong tall, no more, no less. The minister's spirits entered the projections. Wow, the magnificent hall that they had never seen before suddenly came into view. The master of coin, Littlefinger Tyrion Lannister, repeatedly praised it, and soon turned his gaze to the novel patterns on the throne. The master of war, Kingslayer Jaime Lannister, looked around in surprise, and then concentrated on staring at the map of Westeros in the pool, seemingly thinking about future battle plans. The commander of the King's Guard, the Hound Sandor Clegane, looked at the king, and then also shifted his gaze to the map below. Grand Maester Pycelle carefully admired the exquisite decorations on the opposite inner wall. Master of Security Aaron Lantrule, Lord Steward Hannah, and Lord Commander of the King's Guard the bold Barristan Selmy all turned sideways towards the throne, waiting for instructions. Joffrey looked at the nearest empty chair on the right, which was reserved for Duke Tywin. Currently, Duke Tywin had gathered an army of 30,000 in Casterly Rock, training on one side and confronting Earl Mathos Rowan of the Reach on the other, while also recruiting new troops. Duke Tywin's younger brother, the Master of Ships, Kevin Lannister, led 10,000 cavalry from the Westerlands eastward along the river road, and had now entered Harrenhal, taking over the 3,000 cavalry and 10,000 infantry contributed by the lords of the Riverlands and the Vale, and was resting and training. and the true strength of King's Landing was still unknown to the lords. In such a situation, Joffrey highly suspected who the Seven Kingdoms actually thought had the right to make decisions for the Iron Throne. Wouldn't they think it was Duke Tywin? Did Duke Tywin still remember the previous agreement? Joffrey then sent invitations to the Regent and Master of Laws, Tywin Lannister, and the Regent in Hand of the King, Eddard Stark. After a moment, two projections gradually took shape. The ministers all looked forward. The new projections were also 1 jong tall, but instead of appearing directly on the chairs, they stood next to the chairs, facing the king. Duke Eddard was the first to react, bowing to the 100 jong tall king. "Good day, Your Majesty." Chapter 114, Regent Tywin. The ministers all looked towards Duke Tywin. Although only his back could be seen, everyone envisioned his face, cold eyes, expressionless, every wrinkle unmoving. Duke Tywin bowed with his hand on his chest. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Joffrey smiled and nodded. "Grandfather, no need for such formalities, nor you, Lord Eddard. Please, be seated, we have important matters to discuss today." A subtle ceremony of confirming power quietly concluded. The regent and the ministers looked towards the throne. The 100-foot-tall Joffrey and the throne beneath him occupied the entire northern part of the hall. The king looked down, as if looking at ants on the ground. The southern rebels have already begun to move, and the threat from the north is also gradually approaching. "Lord Eddard, what are your thoughts?" Eddard responded solemnly, "Thanks to Your Majesty and the children of the forest, the movements of the wildlings beyond the wall have been completely exposed. The others are still lurking, but the Night's Watch can still hold for now. The lords of the north are also gathering their armies, enough to defend the wall." The ministers remained impassive. The information in Duke Eddard's words was no longer new. But this was normal. Duke Eddard had been away from King's Landing for 3 weeks, visiting lords along the way to recruit soldiers for the Iron Throne. He had only just emerged from the Vale and had not even reached the neck yet. If it weren't for the grace of the god's light screen, Duke Eddard would probably know even less about the changes in the north. Eddard hesitated for a moment, then said, "There are many disputes among the lords of the Riverlands. Duke Hoster of Riverrun is also struggling to contain them. Although he is trying his best to gather troops, the forces are still less than 10,000. The Vale." Eddard couldn't help but recall Lysa's weak and weary face. Lady Lysa seems to have a deep misunderstanding of the royal family. Joffrey certainly understood. He had witnessed the entire meeting between Eddard and Lysa. In front of Eddard, Lysa's hostility and vigilance were almost undisguised. Fortunately, she didn't dare to slander him regarding Jonaran's death or his own parentage. In any case, King's Landing's own strength was already sufficient. As long as the 3 kingdoms of the north did not rebel and continued to send supplies, this war would be much smoother than the War of the 5 Kings in the original story. Once Renly was dealt with, if Lysa still didn't know what was good for her, then it would be time to settle the score. Duke Eddard looked at the map below. Balon Greyjoy of the Iron Islands will not remain indifferent to the chaos in the 7 kingdoms. Even with Theon as a hostage, we must be wary of the Iron Fleet. The Riverlands and the Westerlands coast could both be attacked, Eddard worried. Joffrey couldn't help but recall the plot of the original story. Eddard probably never imagined that Balon Greyjoy would be so fixated on the north. But now that the forces of the north had not marched south, perhaps Balon had some sense and would no longer venture deep into the vast north. So, where would the Iron Fleet go? Joffrey looked at Duke Tywin. "Grandfather, what do you think?" Duke Tywin remained expressionless. "The forces of Casterly Rock are sufficient to defend against attacks from the Iron Islands and the Reach. The lords of the Riverlands can gather more soldiers at any time, so there is probably no need to worry." The Riverlands were Catelyn's home. Eddard wanted to argue, but the Riverlands' passive response to the royal family's call was an obvious fact, so he could only remain silent. Tyrion sighed, "The Riverlands have always been like this. I can understand Duke Hoster's difficulties. I only hope that the Tully family will do their best to mediate and send more grain to King's Landing. There are more and more people in the city." This was a legitimate request. Eddard could only guarantee, the Tully family has always been loyal to the throne. Old Hoster Tully was bedridden and could leave this world at any time. The young Edmure Tully was not strong, and Lysa of the Vale was outwardly strong but inwardly weak. The backbone of the Northern 3 Kingdoms alliance was undoubtedly Duke Eddard, who was in his prime. Eddard's guarantee was very credible. Joffrey looked towards the Stormlands. "Grandfather, what do you think Renly will do next?" "Thanks to the grace of the gods, everyone present had learned a lot of information about the southern rebels, troop deployments, leading generals, and even secret resolutions. Duke Tywin said in a deep voice, "The information is already very clear. Renly is feigning an attack on Massey's Hook to increase the burden on King's Landing, while luring our army south to attack, ambushing us at the opportune moment. But this is not the rebels' main plan." Duke Tywin pointed to the Rose Road. "Renly's army in the Stormlands is clearing the road west. The rebel vanguard of Bitterbridge has already appeared near the Rose Road. The rebels intend to cross the Blackwater Rush upstream, avoid the disadvantage of their fleet, and attack King's Landing from the north." This was also nothing new. Joffrey wasn't just trying to hear Renly's plan again. "Grandfather, in that case, the main battlefield will be at a ford upstream of the Blackwater Rush." Duke Tywin said, "Indeed, if we decide to stop the rebels from crossing the river. If the rebels were allowed to cross the river into the Riverlands, although some losses would be incurred, the rebels could be annihilated to the greatest extent after the victory." Joffrey looked at the ministers. "So, are we going to stop them?" Duke Eddard immediately suggested, "Winter is coming, and the grain in the Riverlands fields is the only hope for countless people to get through the long winter. They cannot withstand the ravages of war." Tyrion looked at the winding Blackwater Rush on the map and sighed, "Is Renly arrogant, or is Duke Mace too proud? It is easy to cross the Blackwater Rush, but once they suffer a defeat, it will be difficult to retreat. Do they think they are sure to win?" Jaime looked at Duke Eddard. "Annihilating all the rebels on the north bank of the Blackwater Rush will make the war end sooner, and the Seven Kingdoms will truly be stable." Eddard immediately frowned. Arryn preemptively retorted, "With the power of the grace of the gods bestowed by His Majesty, where can't we eliminate the rebels? Why must we let the rebels wreak havoc in the Riverlands?" Hannah also agreed, "The treasury is empty, and material reserves are insufficient, so we should take the initiative to attack." Duke Tywin looked towards the throne. Grand Maester Pycelle respectfully asked for instructions. "The advantages and disadvantages are difficult to compare. I wonder if your Majesty has already made a decision." The ministers no longer spoke, and all looked towards the king. Joffrey cast a beam of light towards the Stormlands. "No need to wait for the rebels to join forces. Once the Stormlands rebels leave the castle and move west, immediately send out 10,000 troops to intercept the rebels in the Kingswood." Another beam of light was cast towards Bitterbridge in the Reach. "If the Bitterbridge rebels move east to support, then increase troops for a decisive battle in the Kingswood. If they move north to cross the river, then intercept them at the ford. If they attack the Westerlands, then send troops to pursue them. If they remain still or retreat, then ignore them." Joffrey looked at Duke Tywin. "In short, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and the Crownlands will not become battlefields." Eddard finally breathed a sigh of relief. The Hound raised a question: "What task will Lord Kevin's army be responsible for?" In the king's planned war, Harrenhal in the Riverlands was undoubtedly too far away. Where should Kevin's more than 20,000 soldiers be located? The ministers looked towards Duke Tywin. Joffrey said indifferently, "At that time, King's Landing will inevitably be short of troops. Lord Kevin's army will just happen to be stationed in King's Landing to fill the gap." Duke Tywin nodded slightly. "Kevin will certainly be happy to serve." Joffrey was very satisfied. With Duke Tywin's words, this meeting was not a waste of effort. Regardless of whose subordinates they were originally, as long as they entered King's Landing, they could only become warriors of the throne and the gods. The meeting in the throne room ended. Viserys, who was leading the way, stopped. "Your Majesty, your pet is still fast asleep." Chapter 115, Dragon Dreams. After opening the door, the tamed Viserys retreated step by step with his head lowered. Joffrey stepped into the room alone. Inside the exquisite, small, and warmly decorated bedroom, Daenerys was quietly curled up on the bed, her delicate eyebrows slightly furrowed. The girl breathed in and out, and the lace nightgown draped over her rose and fell rhythmically. As she inhaled deeply, her chest stretched, the nightgown taut, revealing her fair skin without concealment, and as she exhaled slowly, the thin nightgown gradually emerged from the shadows, covering the delicate spring scenery from before. Her tranquil and graceful sleeping posture, slightly disheveled silver hair, paired with that shy, melancholic, and endearing delicate face. What a beautiful sleeping beauty! It made people want to carefully cherish and quietly watch over her, yet also couldn't help but want to ruthlessly ravage her. Joffrey walked gently to the head of the bed. After admiring her for a moment, he reached out his right hand and pressed it on a milky white sphere. So warm, the dragon egg. He felt the heat and vitality coming from within the dragon egg. It was alive, it was growing. Joffrey saw the changes in the dragon egg. Its shell had a faint layer of red light, the radiance of fire magic. The originally restrained and hidden fire runes were devouring source energy from an unknown origin, using it to transform into specks of fire magic energy, seemingly preparing for the birth of the magic dragon, or perhaps it was simply as it should be. Besides this milky white dragon egg with golden stripes, the other two were also here. The state of the pitch-black dragon egg was similar to that of the milky white one. The deep green bronze dragon egg seemed even more vibrant. Tyrion had held it to sleep and named it Wildfire. Wildfire, the masterpiece of the pyromancers of the Alchemists' Guild, a green flammable liquid that could burn flesh and steel to ashes, even burning on the surface of water, resembling dragon flame. Having experienced so much, Tyrion already completely believed that the dragon eggs would hatch. Joffrey, however, understood that he still needed to wait patiently. Before this, he had tried many ways to hatch the dragon eggs. Providing the dragon eggs with the best environment, an ever-burning flame, crystals full of source energy, and rich growth magic energy and fire magic energy. The dragon eggs did not move. He then placed the dragon egg in front of him and created new runes. Unlike other magical tools, the rune energy in the dragon egg was not triggered. That is to say, it was indeed not an unconscious dead object, but a living being that could control rune energy from leaking out. He tried to forge a contract with contract runes, but the dragon egg did not respond. Thinking of the means to control the great lion rain, he imprinted mirror images of fire, growth, and contract runes on the dragon egg, but the rune mirror images remained on the outer shell and did not integrate into the tiny life within the eggshell. The research department even held blood sacrifices several times: 1 life, 10 lives, 100 lives, various races, different identities. The dragon eggs remained unmoved, and the revival of the runes was still slow and peaceful. Although the dragon eggs were indeed alive and growing. But when did it plan to be born? Fire, blood, magic, the objective environment had already been made the best. What other conditions did it need? Familiar aura, Valyrian bloodline? It was precisely out of this conjecture that Joffrey sent all 3 dragon eggs to Daenerys' side and even had her preside over the blood sacrifice, offering sacrifices with Valyrian blood. But the effect did not meet expectations. The dragon eggs did have some changes, the runes were more active, and they felt warmer to the touch, but there was still no sign of hatching. Having eliminated one wrong answer after another, Joffrey had to pay attention to the only remaining singularity. The Red Comet. In the original work, Daenerys held a ceremony under the red comet that streaked across the sky, exchanging fire, blood, and souls for the birth of the magic dragon. The whole process was simple to the point of being crude. She didn't know special spells, nor did she have strange treasures, she just walked into the flames and brought out 3 young dragons. Red Comet. Joffrey stroked the fine scales on the dragon egg, sinking into deep thought. In the era of King Aegon the Dragon, the survival and reproduction of dragons were very normal, not much different from other creatures, and many dragon eggs could hatch. Later on, the Targaryen dragons not only killed each other, but the young dragons that were born became fewer and fewer, their bodies gradually shrinking, until they were deformed and weak, dying just after birth, and finally no dragon eggs hatched successfully. Finally, as the dragons gradually disappeared, magic also began to disappear. More than one person in the original work mentioned that after the appearance of dragons and red comets, the power of magic was obviously enhanced. There was no doubt. Dragons and magic had a mysterious and close connection. Some people said that dragons brought magic, and the death of dragons also took away magic, so summers gradually shortened, and winters became longer and longer. But after the dragons became extinct, the magic of Westeros and Essos did not completely disappear. The others, skin changers, wizards, and shadowbinders all existed in a low-key manner. Magic only declined, not disappeared. What's more, Joffrey verified with his own experience, magic still had power before the revival of the dragons. Then, dragons and magic, perhaps the causal relationship was just the opposite. He had a guess. It was not that dragons brought magic, but that magic brought dragons. As powerful magical creatures, perhaps the survival and reproduction of dragons required a sufficient magical environment. Source energy? Magic energy? Or something else? Joffrey felt that this guess was very reasonable. The ancient behemoths on Earth must rely on high concentrations of oxygen and other conditions to survive. The fire-breathing and flying dragons can't have no environmental restrictions, right? If this was the case, then what the dragon egg needed most for hatching was not fire or life, but a magical environment suitable for survival. Magic ebbed and flowed, and dragons prospered or declined accordingly. Red Comet. Joffrey couldn't help but feel expectant. If now was the low tide of magic, and the appearance of the Red Comet marked a new round of magic tide, then, not only dragons, but the magic empire would also become more prosperous. What was the truth? Joffrey couldn't be sure. Guesses were just guesses after all, and they still needed solid verification. Now he had to wait patiently. When the Red Comet appeared in the sky, the changes in magic would give the answer. Hopefully, it would be a good answer. He moved his hand away from the dragon egg and turned to look at the sleeping Daenerys. With this princess of the dragon family, even if he only repeated the methods of the original work, he could at least hatch the dragon eggs. As long as the young dragons were born, there would be ways to tame them. Dragon, don't! Daenerys murmured in her sleep, her expression seeming somewhat frightened. Joffrey helped her smooth her hair, gently sliding it across the girl's cheeks, collarbone, and back. Daenerys was still immersed in her dream. This was not the first time. Since coming into contact with the dragon eggs, Daenerys often fell asleep during the day. Joffrey knew that this was the so-called dragon dream, unique to the blood of the true dragon, a dream said to have prophetic abilities. He lay down next to Daenerys and wrapped his arms around the trembling girl. Entering her dream. Chapter 116, Is Prophecy Inevitable? Daenerys knew she was dreaming. This wasn't the first time. The first dream happened the night she touched the dragon eggs, and it was a nightmare. In the blurry, dark space, Viserys' ferocious face was particularly prominent. As usual, he screamed and kicked her, "You have awakened the wrath of the sleeping dragon! You have awakened the sleeping dragon!" Viserys' actions were merciless. The pain was so real, her brother's anger so familiar, that she thought she had returned to Illyrio's courtyard, and that the journey across the narrow sea and the sights of the Red Keep were just false dreams. She tried her best to escape, with Viserys chasing closely behind. "You want to see me make a fool of myself?" Her brother's voice was frantic and shrill, like a shriek. "I am the true dragon. I am the king of Westeros. Dany, have you sided with the usurper? How dare you disobey my orders?" "Stop!" Daenerys remembered her first meeting with King Joffrey, when her brother knelt on the ground, trembling. From that day on, Viserys was more timid and panicked than she had ever been at her weakest, turning a blind eye to any humiliation, but secretly gnashing his teeth, his eyes becoming increasingly strange and terrifying as he looked at her. Daenerys couldn't help but be glad that she was in the Red Keep. Behind her, Viserys began to sob, his voice gradually receding, growing fainter and fainter. Daenerys stopped and looked back. Viserys was lying motionless in the dark cave, his arched back twitching slightly, like a wounded little beast. Then, a crack opened in the cave where Viserys was, and flames and golden light poured out from it. Daenerys's heart trembled. It wasn't a cave, but an eye overlooking the world, its sharp, slender pupils staring straight at her, almost suffocating her. Daenerys only wanted to retreat, but her body wouldn't obey, and she couldn't move an inch. "Ugh!" Viserys held his head back, letting out a painful and desperate scream. Pop! Viserys disappeared completely, like a bubble. The massive eye suddenly rose higher. Then, the whole world lit up, and endless flames condensed into countless giant pillars of fire. Under the fiery light, scales as black as the night piled up into a steep form, like a mountain rock. 2 dragon wings spread out, covering the entire sky. Daenerys slowly raised her head inch by inch. A pair of eyes like molten lava were looking at her, meeting her gaze. "Dragon, black dragon!" It opened its mouth, and flames shot out from it. Daenerys suddenly woke up. The sunlight outside the window was warmly hot, but she was trembling all over, covered in cold sweat. She lay on the bed in a daze for a long time. After that, King Joffrey walked in, and Viserys closed the door from the outside. The young king sat on the edge of the bed, holding her hand and asking with concern, as if the two were good friends, confidants, or even intimate lovers. His eyes were very beautiful, like a calm green lake. Daenerys told him about her dream. The king told her that it was a dragon dream, and that many people in the Targaryen family had dreamed of it, and that it was said to contain prophecies about the future. Dragon. Daenerys thought of the black dragon egg the king had sent. Is this the black dragon in the dream? She began to look forward to the second dragon dream. Perhaps she would see the black dragon again, and this time she would no longer be afraid. The black dragon was a harbinger of the future, a guardian spirit hatched from the dragon egg. The second dragon dream appeared the day after the blood sacrifice. But this time there was no black dragon, but 3 dragon eggs as tall as a person, with the same color and texture as the 3 she held to sleep. She stood in the middle of them, stroking each scale obsessively, so charming, as if possessing magic. No, they did possess magic. The dragon eggs were breeding magic dragons, which once soared in the sky, spewed flames, and won Westeros for the Targaryens. Joffrey's smile flashed through her mind, and Daenerys's reverie stopped immediately. The Iron Throne already belonged to the Baratheons. She hugged the black dragon egg, pressed her face against it, the scalding temperature and powerful heartbeat coming together, full of vitality, as if it could hatch at any time. Daenerys thought confusedly about her future. Viserys didn't seem like a good king in the past, and now it was impossible for him to become king at all. So what should I do? Listening to the heartbeat of the dragon egg, Daenerys lowered her head. The ground was crimson, similar to the color of the Red Keep. In fact, life in the Red Keep was not bad. There was no more beating and scolding from her brother, no more fear of being assassinated, there were people to serve her, no need to worry about food and clothing, and there were many playmates and games. Except for that Sansa Stark. Daenerys knew what Sansa was thinking. It was nothing more than fear that she would steal her fiancé. Nevertheless, compared to the various encounters in Essos, Sansa's petty actions still seemed so gentle and polite, almost like playing around, but adding some fun to the dull daily life. Just live like this? Abandon the so-called ambition to restore the country? Daenerys was a little hesitant. Viserys repeated to her countless times that the Iron Throne was the glory and natural right of the Targaryens, and that the true dragon was the king of Westeros. The crimson on the ground began to flow, gradually leaping up, and finally turning into a sea of fire. She vaguely heard the roar inside the dragon egg. Dragon dreams are some kind of prophecy. She thought, let this dream make the decision for me. All 3 dragon eggs let out the roar of a true dragon, one after another, louder and louder, gradually forming a rhythm, like an ancient and mysterious ballad. So she stood in the middle of the dragon eggs, waiting for the verdict. However, King Joffrey appeared abruptly, and the entire dream froze with it, and the dancing flames also stopped moving, turning into still lives in a painting. King Joffrey looked around, then took her hand and walked towards the milky white dragon egg. Prophecy? I don't believe in that kind of thing. The king smiled softly, when the dragon egg hatches, you will be the master of this white dragon. What I say is definitely accurate. Daenerys sighed silently in her heart. Is this still the prophecy of the dragon dream? What should I do? Later, Daenerys had several more dragon dreams, but King Joffrey's figure appeared every time, and the dream almost became a secret stronghold for the 2 of them. Until this dream now. She appeared in the boundless ice and snow, and on the dark night sky, the stars wept blood. Roar! The behemoth was roaring. The wind swept in with ice and snow, and Daenerys could hardly open her eyes. Roar! Roar! Similar roars came from behind, and the air seemed to be a little warmer, not enough to freeze people stiff. The behemoths rose into the air and fought each other in the sky. One side was spitting frost, and the other was spewing flames. Ice dragon and fire dragon. Under the occasional lighting of the fire, Daenerys looked forward, and an endless number of dead people stood all over the earth. Deeper in, a pale moon had cracks that flew out countless ice dragons. There were only 3 fire dragons in the sky. Dragon, don't! Daenerys didn't know what this foreshadowed, but it definitely wasn't a good thing. Step! Step! Footsteps came from the snow behind her, and a familiar man's voice said, "Don't be afraid, it's just a prophecy, the future is in the hands of mankind." The man threw out an inconspicuous metal ball. An unprecedented explosion overturned everything. On the bed, Daenerys opened her eyes. The handsome young man smiled very gently, and his fiery eyes made people blush. Chapter 117, Good morning, good night. Your Majesty. Daenerys struggled slightly, trying to escape Joffrey's embrace. Joffrey nonchalantly released his arms, letting the shy girl sit on the innermost part of the bed, while he leisurely occupied most of the bed, closing his eyes to rest, as if planning to catch up on sleep here. This was a first. Listening to the man's breathing and smelling the faint scent of smoke, Daenerys was at a loss for a moment. After all, she was a captive, the king's spoils of war. During this month in the Red Keep, Daenerys was often dragged by the king to attend various banquets and meetings, meeting many people, including courtiers, lords of the Seven Kingdoms, noble ladies, and envoys from the free trade cities. The king's intentions were never concealed in the slightest. He was announcing to the world that the Targaryen dynasty had completely become a thing of the past, and the Iron Throne was no longer in dispute. In the past, Viserys firmly believed that the nobles and people of the Seven Kingdoms were missing the rule of the true dragon. As long as the true king set foot on the land of Westeros, everyone would be overjoyed to replace the fire dragon banner and trample the usurper's stag banner under their feet, welcoming the return of the true dragon. Daenerys used to be half doubtful. But now, after personally contacting the lords of the Seven Kingdoms, she didn't believe it at all. These guys were all respectful to King Joffrey, and 2.5 of their 3 sentences were obviously or implicitly complimenting the king, praising the Baratheons and the gods, and had no good words for the Targaryens. Among the many lords, Daenerys didn't see many sincere people. Most of them were as cunning as the governors and princes of the free trade cities, always with smiles on their faces, but they could turn their backs on you at any time for gold coins and orders, or something else. Occasionally, there were a few people who were not so insidious and whose words were trustworthy, such as Duke Eddard Stark, but they didn't have any awe or nostalgia for her bloodline. Daenerys then knew that to restore rule, she could only use swords and dragon fire. But she had nothing. Swords were in the hands of the lords of the Seven Kingdoms and the free trade cities, and she couldn't get any support. Dragon fire was reviving, but the master of the fire dragon was no longer a Targaryen, but King Joffrey. She was sure that the king must have a way to control the dragon, and if it really didn't work, he would kill it without mercy. And the king even possessed a more powerful and more awe-inspiring power, divine grace. How could it be such a coincidence? She was brought into King's Landing just when King Joffrey was crowned. Let her see the giants of light and fire with her own eyes, and see hundreds of thousands of people cheering and enthusiastically embracing the messengers of the gods at the same time, as if they had ascended to heaven. Later, Daenerys herself was also bestowed divine grace by the king, sharing the glory of the gods. She quickly noticed the difference in her divine grace aura. First of all, she didn't need to go to the wishing stone often to ask for more divine grace, the aura could operate completely on its own. This was a special treatment only available to ministers, said to be created by more precious higher divine grace power. In addition, the tasks arranged by her divine grace aura were also very strange. Such as a good morning greeting to the king. Every day when she got up, she had to run down the stairs full of energy, stand in front of the mirror with full of energy, and then put her left hand on her waist, her right palm on the side of her face, tilt her head, and have to smile very happily and energetically and say strange words, "Oh Ni-chan, oh heyo." After sending the image recorded by the aura to the king, he would also score each morning greeting, and those that failed had to be done again. It didn't go well at first. But after repeated repetitions, Daenerys felt that she had understood the emotions contained in it. That must be a very beautiful wish. She seemed to see another girl who really lived so happily, carefree, living a simple and peaceful life. Daenerys gradually accepted this morning greeting. However, this was not all. From time to time, the aura also asked her to prepare gifts for the king, hand-drawn portraits, carefully sung ballads, carefully woven embroidery, wood carvings carved one knife at a time, and so on. She also had to think of an interesting story or experience to tell the king every night before going to bed as a good night blessing. Daenerys put a lot of thought into this. Even Viserys, or the kind Sir Willem Darry, had never occupied such a large proportion in her thoughts. She had almost become his appendage, living only for him, thinking all day about pleasing him and giving her task a higher score, as if only in this way would a day's efforts be complete. Pet. Daenerys knew that Viserys and many people called her that, but the servants were more respectful to her. How long did Viserys struggle with this title? Was it a quarter of an hour? Daenerys wanted to believe it, but she knew deep down that Viserys could never persist for a quarter of an hour in front of the king. It started a month ago. Viserys was not a sleeping dragon, not a true king, and no longer her brother. Although he was still called Viserys Targaryen, he was just a humble servant, not even as good as a pet. At least no one dared to bully her. Except for the king. Daenerys quietly glanced at Joffrey beside her, who seemed to have fallen asleep. Pet. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Should I resist desperately? Daenerys stared blankly at Joffrey's face. She didn't like her previous life. The governors and princes of the free trade cities did not sincerely accept her and Viserys, but were conducting a profitable investment. She and Viserys were just an asset of the governors. For greater profits or smaller losses, those people would throw out the asset at any time, without a trace of hesitation or any concern. After all, it was just an asset, not a friend or ally, nor a living person. In comparison, the current life is much more stable and peaceful. A pet is at least a life, warmer and more cared for than an asset. Princess Daenerys Targaryen of Dragonstone, Stormborn, she used to be called that. But she neither remembered Dragonstone, nor the swift and rare storm, and never received the treatment of a royal princess. Only Viserys' stories and promises. But he himself destroyed everything he had said. The pet spoken from Viserys' mouth was undoubtedly the most ear-piercing. Like steel needles, piercing the last remaining fantasies in her heart. Like drops of ice water, extinguishing the fire of her hope. Like boulders, breaking the shackles on her body, allowing her to shake off all the shackles of the past and welcome a new life. Dany, I almost forgot, what about today's good morning greeting? Daenerys came back to her senses. The king in front of her had already opened his eyes, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. His expression seemed very expectant. Good morning greeting. Daenerys subconsciously made that gesture. Oh Ni-chan, oh heyo. Kawi. Joffrey couldn't help but pinch the girl's cheek. Thank you for your hard work. After thinking about it, I can't be too selfish. He rubbed her ear. Starting tomorrow, change it to a good morning kiss. Chapter 118, Sansa's Worries. That night, Daenerys moved into the king's chambers. The king didn't intend to hide it, so the news quickly spread throughout the Red Keep, and by the next morning, it had reached the ears of the king's betrothed, Sansa Stark. The elegant bedroom was quiet. Sansa lowered her head, continuing to work on the embroidery in her lap, but the needle in her hand trembled uncontrollably, revealing the turmoil in her heart. The maid who brought the news waited to the side. Jane Poole quickly signaled the maid to leave, leaving only her and Sansa in the room. Jane gently sat down beside Sansa. She is a sinner of Targaryen blood, and now she is just a servant attending to His Majesty. It doesn't mean anything, it doesn't decide anything. Sansa stopped her handiwork, staring blankly at the pattern on the embroidery. She was embroidering her dire wolf lady and Joffrey's mount, a white stag. They were playing in a lush green forest, next to a lake of blue water, a hint of an iceberg, and a scarlet castle. Only half of the ancient poem in the blank space had been embroidered. The second half was a beautiful love story, a sincere and passionate confession. This embroidery was a gift she was going to give to her fiancé, so that every time he saw this picture, he would know her heart. It wasn't finished yet. She wanted to continue, but her hands were too weak to exert any strength. Jane Poole gently took her hand and removed the trembling needle to avoid piercing her delicate skin and causing unnecessary pain. Sansa, are you all right? Jane's voice was full of concern. Sansa nodded, then shook her head. She only felt a chaos in her brain, as if she had thought of many, many things, yet it seemed like she hadn't thought of anything, just blankly dazed. Daenerys. Sansa managed to focus her thoughts on this name. Daenerys. Sansa thought mournfully of that delicate and beautiful face. It was indeed true, this woman had indeed brought disaster, bewitching my prince. Is this the curse and revenge of the Targaryen family? It's been a whole night. What did she and my prince do? I am the queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Sansa also thought of that Hannah. This woman also often entered the king's chambers, and there were vague rumors in the Red Keep about Hannah and the king. Could this also be true? A strange pang and sorrow swept in from the depths of her heart, and Sansa felt something breaking. That was the pure illusion, wasn't it? Sansa recalled the Winterfell banquet, that cold night. Ice and snow covered the earth, like glittering petals, like a white carpet, celebrating the birth of a beautiful love. The prince kissed her lips passionately. He used fierce fire to dispel the chill of the night, used flesh and blood to bring intense joy, and used his arms and chest to declare her belonging. At that time, Sansa's past dreams and prayers all came true. She would marry a handsome prince, live in a magnificent court, become the queen of the Seven Kingdoms, be supported by thousands of people, and become the idol and desire of countless young girls. She would give birth to lovely little princes and princesses and raise them to adulthood. They would rule the country, lead troops in battle, govern their fiefdoms, save the people, drive out evil, and promote justice. They would learn all her skills, even surpassing her, their mother, marry their beloved, and live a carefree life with the most beautiful family. Sansa looked towards the dressing table. Jane Poole followed her gaze and immediately understood Sansa's meaning. Jane walked over and brought out the crown made of winter roses from the cabinet. It was still in full bloom, as bright as ever, with clusters of flowers. Looking at the azure and translucent crown, Sansa couldn't help but immerse herself in the memories of her farewell to Winterfell. In the white light of the morning, Jane and Beth chirped about the preparations for the trip, like two happy little birds. Sansa felt a little reluctant. Little Beth stayed in Winterfell and couldn't go south with everyone. This meant that she and Beth wouldn't see each other for a long time. And Winterfell. The Red Keep and Winterfell were too far apart, the journey was difficult, and after marrying Prince Joffrey, she would probably only be able to return to Winterfell once every few years, and even longer after a few more years. Jane and Beth reached a consensus and chose a silver leather robe for Sansa, embroidered with dense, restrained patterns. Sansa accepted the advice of her two good friends. After changing her clothes, they walked out of the room and headed towards Winterfell's east gate. The reluctance and sadness in Sansa's heart gradually faded, replaced by curiosity and anticipation for the prince's gift. What would the gift be? Sansa guessed many things. A dress, a bouquet of flowers, a love poem, a ring. She looked forward to surprises, but didn't have too many expectations. And the gift she finally received completely exceeded her expectations, a crown, a wreath made of winter roses. What a romantic gift! The prince even called her the Queen of Love and Beauty, and confessed his love to her passionately. It was simply a dream. Amidst the praise of the crowd and the envy of her female companions, Sansa fell into intoxication. Afterwards, the crown showed no signs of withering at all. Throughout the journey south, it was as delicate and vibrant as it had been at the beginning. Sansa seemed to see a legend 100 years later. The prince made a crown of winter roses that would never fade, and dedicated it to the Queen of Love and Beauty in his heart. Throughout their lives, their marriage was like the crown, never fading, as beautiful as ever. But now, had the happy marriage ended before it even began? Would Daenerys steal my future? Sansa stood up. Her body was still a little weak and powerless, and she called out to her best friend, Jane, "Help me over there, I really can't pretend nothing happened." She murmured, "Could it be that everything in the past was just a lie? I don't believe it. I don't believe it." Jane Poole could only hold her arm. Inside the bedchamber, Joffrey was reviewing the reports, with Daenerys and Viserys and others attending. Sansa came in from outside the door, looking mournful. Joffrey dismissed the others, looked at Jane Poole, and together they helped Sansa onto his couch. "What's wrong? Your face is so pale. Have you seen the Maester?" Joffrey asked with concern, as if he really didn't know the reason. Looking at the prince's calm and natural eyes, Sansa almost thought she was worrying for no reason. But the Daenerys she had just seen couldn't be fake, could she? Sansa poured out the worries in her heart, expressing her fears, her resentment towards Daenerys, and her longing and doubts about love and marriage. Joffrey sighed, "Sansa, how could you doubt the sincere love between us? Even doubt the sacred marriage contract?" Jane also comforted, "His Majesty must have serious considerations." Joffrey said seriously, "For the sake of world peace, for the sake of human harmony, I have to put aside personal preferences and honor and endure Daenerys, and even more others." Sansa was confused. Chapter 119. Visenya. "Sansa, you will be the queen of the world." Joffrey's expression was firm and calm, as if stating an undeniable fact. "The gods have bestowed grace and divine will. I must share the glory of the gods with all ignorant souls, cleanse the turbid world, establish a kingdom of heaven on earth, and bestow grace upon all people. The day of universal light is not far away. Humanity will become one. One nation, one true God, one king." The voice echoed powerfully in the wide hall. "He wants to conquer the world." What a magnificent declaration! Sansa had to recognize reality. Her prince was already a king and messenger chosen by God. Kings and princes are different. Even Sansa understood this. "Sansa, people all over the world are our subjects. We have a heavy responsibility to maintain peace and eliminate unnecessary disasters." Joffrey looked at the sky outside the window. The sky outside the window was very clear, with a few white clouds dotting the azure curtain, and faint flocks of birds flying from a distance, nothing else. But Sansa seemed to see countless chaotic scenes in his eyes. "Do you see them?" They are wailing, crying, and falling into the quagmire of war and hatred. How can we turn a blind eye to their continued infighting for our own selfish reasons? Joffrey shook his head and sighed, his face full of regret and pity. Sansa was completely at a loss. Wasn't she here to defend love? Why did she suddenly start talking about such terrible topics? And what do Daenerys and these have to do with each other? You are the queen of the world. Joffrey looked into Sansa's eyes. For the sake of the people of the world, think carefully, why must I deal with Daenerys in this way? If I don't do this, how much harm will it cause, and how many people will lose their parents and children? Joffrey gently stroked Sansa's shoulders, his eyes full of encouragement and expectation. Think carefully, what is the answer? Sansa almost forgot her previous sadness. Compared with the king's thoughts and ambitions, her own worries and dreams seemed to have become childish ideas of a little girl. Life, death, and conquest. Sansa suddenly realized that there was a war going on in the Seven Kingdoms. In places she couldn't see, people were suffering unimaginable hardships. What is the answer? I will be the queen of the world. Sansa tried to put herself in the role of queen and think with a compassionate heart. Daenerys. Sansa thought of the name again, but this time she didn't treat her as a rival for favor, but to see what impact she could have on the Seven Kingdoms and the world. Daenerys Targaryen. Thinking of the whispers of the Red Keep servants, Sansa hesitated and spoke. Because of her special bloodline and identity, allowing her to submit to the Iron Throne can appease those who miss the Targaryens and prevent them from participating in the rebellion, thereby saving more lives. Joffrey nodded in approval. What else? Sansa bit her lip and thought for a long time, thinking about all the special things about Daenerys, but she still couldn't think of any more answers. Before today, she had never considered such serious matters. So I'm not a good queen yet. Sansa shook her head in disappointment, then looked at Joffrey, expecting his answer with her eyes, an answer not for love, but for the kingdom and its people. That's all she hoped for. As long as the love and marriage contract remain pure and solid. Daenerys. To become the queen of the world, perhaps this is the sacrifice that must be made, to endure some people and things you don't like. Just like her mother, even though she didn't like Jon that her father brought back, she still took care of Jon as he grew up. Family, responsibility, honor. Sansa seemed to understand her mother's feelings. Joffrey did not directly say his answer, but took Sansa to a small room next to him. The furnishings here were very new, without swords or armor, decorated with colors and patterns that only girls would like, and 3 huge dragon eggs were placed on the bedside. Sansa quickly understood that this was Daenerys's residence. Joffrey held up a jet black dragon egg. Sansa, do you remember it? Touch it again. The prince had shown her these dragon eggs in Winterfell. At that time, their scales felt comfortable to the touch, but they were still as cold as stone. Dragon eggs, Daenerys. Sansa widened her eyes slightly, as if she had thought of something. Then, she reached out and touched the dragon egg. It's so warm, there must be new life gestating inside. Jane Poole's hands cherished and caressed the white dragon egg, marveling in surprise. Only then did Sansa pay attention to her best friend again. Where was Jane just now? Did she go out? They are indeed alive. Joffrey held Sansa's hand. At the right time, Daenerys can bring us 3 young dragons. They will grow strong, until they rival the 3 giant dragons of Aegon the Conqueror, so that the 7 kingdoms will remember the past glory and power, so that the Iron Throne will once again have the inheritance of dragons, and unite the hearts of hundreds of millions of people. Sansa knew this was another answer. 3 giant dragons. Compared to Daenerys's invisible and intangible identity, this is more real power and a clearer future. But with the grace of the gods, is the power of dragons still necessary? Across the narrow sea, there are still black fires watching. Sansa was stunned for a moment. Black fire. She thought about it carefully and remembered that this was the family established by Daemon Blackfyre, the noble bastard of the Targaryens. The descendants of Blackfyre impersonated young Aegon, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and attempted to capture the 7 kingdoms. Joffrey put down the dragon egg. The flames of war have already spread in the 7 kingdoms, and Blackfyre will not let go of this opportunity. By then, I don't know how many more people will lose their homes, loved ones, and lives. Sansa tried hard to put herself in the perspective of the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms, and seemed to start worrying about the future turmoil. Not only that. Joffrey cupped Sansa's cheeks. An unspeakable force surged into her mind, and Sansa saw endless legions of the dead standing in the ice and snow, countless ice dragons flying out of the pale moon, and fire dragons in the sky being submerged by the ice and cold. Gods above, what kind of monster is this? The gods bestow grace, but our enemies are not just mortals. What we have to stop is the apocalypse and the evil god. Joffrey stared into Sansa's eyes. Sansa, my queen. For the sake of the world, and for our own sake, we must unite all forces that can be united, try our best to resolve conflicts, save every life, and accumulate every bit of strength to resist the final cold. Aegon the Conqueror did not achieve his achievements alone. His beloved wife, Queen Visenya, was the Dragon King's most important wing. Together, they created the 7 kingdoms and protected tens of millions of people. Sansa, are you willing to be my Visenya? Jane Poole whispered in surprise. The short tone was like a dream, as if witnessing a legend about to be born. Sansa smelled a wonderful romantic atmosphere. Not just love, but an epic poem. She finally became intoxicated in her fiancé's eyes. I do. Chapter 120. Sansa left, satisfied and happy. The people who had been serving in the palace returned to their positions, quietly awaiting the king's orders. Joffrey lazily embraced the young girl beside him. Hannah, who made my dearest queen so sad. You take care of it. Although he didn't intend to hide the matter of Daenerys, he still couldn't condone such shameful tattling. Everyone should know that gossiping in the court will come at a price. Hannah responded with a proper smile. Jane Poole's cheeks were rosy, and her hands gently rested on Joffrey's shoulders, unsure whether to push him away or crave a more intimate affection. Unlike previous occasions, this time she stayed in the king's palace, and Miss Sansa had seen it very clearly. Despite having a legitimate excuse, Jane was still somewhat uneasy. Although her vision was filled with the walls of the palace, Jane seemed to feel the scrutinizing gazes of everyone in the palace, as if questioning her identity and purpose. Am I betraying Miss Sansa? Your Majesty, it's noon already, let Jane serve you lunch. Jane came up with a reason, trying to escape this overwhelming situation and allow herself a moment to breathe. Joffrey playfully twirled the young girl's black hair with interest. Your hair is beautiful. Jane's attempt failed. The king never acted according to common sense. She remembered their first kiss, forceful and domineering, yet it made her whole body go weak, unable to muster any resistance. Jane had fantasized countless times about her future husband. He might be a clever and steady servant, who relied on his own efforts and loyalty to serve his lord, gradually gaining importance and earning people's respect, just like her father, who was the steward of Winterfell. He might be a brave knight, invincible on the battlefield, and also able to protect the weak with integrity, even owning a village and a small castle. More fortunately, he might be a nobleman of high birth, the second son of a family in the north or the Riverlands, meeting and falling in love at a banquet, and finally overcoming many obstacles to enter the halls of marriage. Jane didn't dare to fantasize any further. After all, she was just the daughter of a steward, of humble origin, and she could only marry someone suitable in the future, at most relying on her looks and brains to climb one level higher. But all of this was completely ended after the king's kiss. Based on her limited understanding of King Joffrey, Jane understood that she could no longer marry anyone else. Knights, servants, lords, all these futures had been shattered. The king's willfulness was never concealed, and he would not allow anyone to take away what he wanted. Jane knew she had become one of them. She had thought about confessing to Sansa. But Sansa was already engaged to the king, and had confided in her countless times about her feelings for the king and her dreams for the future. If she confessed, it was impossible for Sansa to be completely unaffected, and the king would soon find out. What would happen then? Jane couldn't imagine all the changes, but she knew very well that it wouldn't be good for Sansa, or for herself. Then she could only try her best to hide this secret. Jane had a secret that she had to keep from Sansa for the first time. The king seemed to enjoy this feeling, sometimes deliberately being affectionate with her near Sansa, but without ever piercing through the veil. Jane didn't dare to resist, she could only half-heartedly comply. She couldn't sleep for nights on end because of it. She worried about the terrible reaction Sansa might have if she found out, and she also silently weighed her own balance in her heart. Her father was still the steward of Winterfell, and had returned to the north with Lord Eddard. Miss Sansa was very kind to her, and the two were best friends, talking about everything. Winterfell was also her home for more than 10 years. She clearly remembered those beautiful memories, familiar faces, remembered every tower and every hot spring in Winterfell, and also remembered the crimson face on the heart tree in the God's Wood. The balance initially leaned completely towards Winterfell. But as time went by, Jane noticed with panic and confusion that the balance was gradually shifting towards the Red Keep. After all, Sansa and she were already in the Red Keep, and life in Winterfell had become an unchanging past, and their future lives would be spent in the Southern Court. Sansa had more playmates and friends. Jane's role by Sansa's side was slowly fading, so much so that she had enough free time to respond to the king's summons. Before, she and Sansa were inseparable, and they often slept in the same room. Jane's position was gradually becoming blurred. As the steward's daughter and Sansa's best friend, she didn't need to do the hardest and most laborious work, she just needed to accompany Sansa usually. But what if Sansa didn't need companionship anymore? Suddenly having a lot of free time, Jane really didn't know what to do. She just wanted to continue following Sansa, even if it was just to say a few more words, or even just to watch Sansa embroider. But the noble ladies and maids of the Red Keep surrounded Sansa all day long. Their sweet words sounded more heartfelt, and Sansa was completely immersed in these activities such as dancing, poetry, and music. Jane was often forgotten by them. At this time, she actually vaguely began to look forward to the king's summons. At least, there were fewer people near the king, and she could also occupy a position next to him, watching the king do this and that, and it wasn't much different from her previous life. Because of these things, am I betraying Sansa? Jane asked herself again. Daenerys's matter seemed to be the king's fault, and Sansa's reaction seemed reasonable. But she was speaking good words for the king, both openly and secretly, not out of concern for Sansa, but out of obedience to the king's orders. Jane turned her head slightly and looked at Daenerys, who was sitting not far away. She seemed to feel Daenerys's feelings, which were similar to her own, making choices that she had never imagined before for the sake of many things. At least, Sansa is happy now. Jane felt that she had made the right choice. It was not betrayal, but a benevolent lie. How many noble lords can remain loyal to their wives forever? Not to mention the king of the Seven Kingdoms. This was an unavoidable fact. Sansa is not old enough to accept this kind of thing, I am protecting her. Jane convinced herself. Moreover, the king also has such a major mission and responsibility. He must put down Renly's rebellion, stop the Long Night, and unite the people of the world together. The king said that Aegon the Conqueror married 2 wives, had 3 dragons, and only conquered 6 kingdoms. For the sake of the whole world, 3 dragons are far from enough, and 2 wives are far from enough. Listening to the heartbeat in the king's chest, Jane silently thought about her future. Queen Jane Poole. That way, she can be with Sansa forever, right? Jane lowered her hands, released all restraints and shame, and merged into the king's embrace. Joffrey's thoughts had returned to business. On the table in front of him were 2 reports of different styles. One was written on paper with ink, and the other was displayed magically on a palm-sized piece of glass, that is, his unique mobile phone Xiaobai. He also designed a God's Grace light screen for himself, but not many people were qualified to disturb him on the God's Grace light screen. Most of the reports would be stored in Xiaobai for him to process centrally when he had time. Expense settlement, task progress, data reports, and requests for instructions, Joffrey was already skilled in approving them. Until a report with novel content. Joffrey looked at the signature at the end, the president of the Alchemist Guild, Heron.